It was my first year of university. I had just finished unpacking all of my stuff into my room, and my family had just left. Later on that same day, my roommate finally arrived, and right from the get-go, I knew this kid was the most socially inept person I'd ever met. I introduced myself as Dan, staking out my arm for a handshake. He paused, looked down at my arm as if he didn't understand at first, then laughed and went, "Oh," and gave me an almost dead fish handshake. I had to ask him for his name since he didn't even tell me when we shook hands. He was Dale. I tried to make small talk, but he just answered my questions with yes or no's, occasionally awkwardly laughing or smiling. Within minutes, we were both just sitting on our beds, on our laptops, not talking to each other. I was upset and planned on requesting to be placed with a different roommate. Anyone would be better than Dale. I thought Dale was just a really awkward kid, but I soon learned he was much more than just that. I met some of the other kids on my floor and they seemed cool, so that was good. I came back to my dorm after looking around campus the first night to find Dale still in the same position he was in when I left. I said, "What's up, Dale?" and he didn't answer. Not to my surprise. It was 9:30, I didn't have anything to do, so I turned out the lamp on my side of the room and went to bed. I didn't actually fall asleep anytime soon though. Dale was on his laptop until 3 in the morning. When he finally closed his laptop, I fell asleep pretty quickly, but I woke up within the hour. The blinds to our room had been opened, and the moonlight now creeping into the room made everything visible, including Dale sitting on the side of his bed, looking at me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and said, "Dale, what the hell are you doing?" He whispered back, "Sorry," and laid down. The next morning, I woke up to find Dale had already gotten up. I felt like it was the first time he left the room. It was a Saturday. The first Saturday of the year, meaning orientation and all the campus festivities. During the orientation, as my group was walking by the school gardens, I heard a couple of students ahead of me saying, "What is that kid doing in there?" I saw who they were talking about. It was Dale, literally sitting in the dirt behind a patch of bushes, rubbing the bark of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, otherwise I'm sure she would have said something. I just walked by not saying anything, eventually telling the 2 kids I overheard that he was my roommate as a way to start a conversation and maybe make some friends. They apologized for me. None of us really knew if it was appropriate to laugh or not, but we did. I made friends with those 2 kids, and we made plans to get together that night. I also learned when I got back to my dorm that the school found another roommate for me. Things seemed to be turning around quickly for the better. I left the room that night to go meet up with the 2 kids I met. And when I got back, Dale was sitting on the desk chair facing the door. I said, "Oh, hey, what's up?" He said nothing, very matter-of-factly. I sat down on my bed and opened my laptop, and realized I forgot to lock it. I also realized that all of my emails had been opened. Emails I was pretty sure I didn't even read, and a bunch of folders of mine had been opened. Dale must have snooped through my laptop. When I asked him if he did, he responded no very loudly, half a second after I even finished my question. I could read him like a book. This creepy kid was literally going through my computer when I was out. I knew he did it, but I didn't pursue it. I was ready to go to bed, so as I went into my bed to look for my pajamas, I felt like my clothing had all been moved around as well. I knew I'd be out of there forever by tomorrow, so I didn't say anything. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a zipper. I sat up and saw Dale on the ground, going through my bag. I turned the lamp on, this time confronting him about it. He played dumb, saying, "I think you have my toothbrush by mistake." It was the closest thing to wits that he'd shown up until that point. Still, I knew he was lying, and I knew something was wrong with him, so I couldn't get physical with him. The next day, I met my new roommate in the same building, and everything went well. Sunday night, after having a decent conversation with my roommate, who was no social butterfly, but was miles better than Dale, we both turned off our lights and went to bed. For the 3rd night in a row, I woke up at some off hour of the night to a strange noise. It was a weird clicking noise. It wasn't consistent, but I'd hear it at least twice every 30 seconds. I got up, hoping to find something innocent, like a heavy bag putting pressure on a weak floorboard, or even a mouse. But as I scoped out the room, I realized the sound was actually coming from the other side of the door. The nightlight in the common area was always on, so when I looked through the peephole, I was able to see the scalp of the person standing on the other side of our door. They were looking down, so I couldn't see their face, but now that I was paying attention, I realized the tiny clicking noises were actually coming from the doorknob. I was sure the person was trying to unlock the door. I dialed the number for the campus police department, and they showed up in under 5 minutes to the common room, and only then did I feel it was safe to open the door. I found the officers to have Dale in cuffs. I had a feeling it was him. I told them everything, that he was my former roommate who was going through my stuff, so I switched dorms, only to find him trying to break into my new dorm. They took him away. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I never saw him again. He either got suspended for the semester or expelled. I got through the rest of my years at university like anybody else. However, the nightmarish experience I had with Dale still pops up in my head every now and then. I went to Binghamton University for 2 years. I quickly made a big group of friends there, and we'd go out every weekend. One weekend on a Friday night in October, when my group didn't have any big plans together, me and 2 other close friends decided to hang out in the school nature preserve by the lake. There was this little clearing on the far side of the lake that was convenient for fires. Since it was so far from view of the school or campus security, kids would sometimes, but not often, come here to smoke pot, drink, and do basically all the other drugs. It was a relatively unknown spot on campus by most, and we liked that about it. Tonight we just brought a bunch of beers, lit a fire, and hung out, having what we referred to at the time as a bro chat. As the night progressed, time seemed to pass quicker as the alcohol began to take effect. Eventually it got to the point where we were all laughing so hard that one of my 2 friends was on the floor rolling in the leaves. That was when my other friend stopped laughing and went, "Shh." We all perked up and listened, and heard the crunching of leaves and branches in the distance. We threw our bottles in the lake since we were all under 21, and it wasn't unheard of for campus police to come through the woods on weekends to catch kids doing drugs. We tucked the rest of the beers into a backpack. I was moderately drunk, so my paranoia was higher than usual. That was probably the case for all of us. The fire exposed us to anyone passing through the woods. But the thing is, this spot was so unknown and far from campus that it was rare to find anybody else that deep into the woods. It sounded like just one person in the distance. The sound of a tree branch snapping not too far away freaked all of us out. None of us were really the confrontational ones from our group, so we were lacking that one person who would have the confidence to stand up and yell out to whoever was out there. Instead, we all just sat in silence, shushing each other. We heard what seemed to be somebody or something circling us, or at least walking around in a C shape around our little campsite. It literally started to feel like we were in the movie The Blair Witch Project, because these sounds in the near distance, like cracking tree branches and leaves crunching on the ground, kept echoing over to our campsite. We laughed about it at first, but I personally soon became terrified of who or what it could be. Out of the blue, a huge thud made all 3 of us jump. At first I didn't understand, even though I saw what caused the sound. It took me a few seconds to digest the fact that a branch had been thrown into the center of our little fire site. One of my 2 friends took off running, while my other friend and I sat behind, looking at each other, half laughing, half concerned. I feel like we didn't know yet if this was some kind of joke or not. Then, my friend let out a scream of pain as he was struck in the face by another tree branch. I grabbed the backpack, helped my friend up off the floor, and we hauled ass back in the direction of our dorm. When we made it to the road separating the nature preserve from our dorm, we stopped to catch our breath. But whoever was out there proved to be following us when we heard footsteps coming closer to the road. We continued to run back to the dorm, and when we got back to our floor, we found our other friend in his room already. We looked out of his room window down to the woods. There was someone pacing back and forth by the woods, and every time a car passed, they would walk back into the woods. Eventually, whoever it was went back into the woods for good, to never be seen again by us. We continued our drinking session in the dorm room, and within 10 minutes we were all laughing about it. It wasn't until the next morning that we all realized how terrifying that experience actually was. We never really went back into the woods past dark after that. This takes place during the first week of school, my freshman year at the University of Iowa. I was just starting to get comfortable with my roommate. He was dedicated to the idea of rushing a fraternity, and rush week was starting the next week, but the parties were starting Thursday of the first week. My roommate didn't want to go alone because it would be harder to meet people that way, so he wanted me to go. I happily agreed to go with him. Even though I had no interest in rushing a fraternity, I still had intentions to go to parties. After all, I was attending a party school. My roommate wanted to go to one frat party on Thursday, and then parties at different frat houses on Friday and Saturday. On this Thursday night, we were headed to perhaps one of the lowest ranked frats. I'm pretty sure it was an underground one too. But his logic in attending was to have a backup frat in case the higher ones wouldn't give him a bid. The frat house was really far from campus in a much more slummy downtown area. We pulled up to a corner house, and if it weren't for the blasting music and cars parked everywhere, we would never picture this house as a frat house. It literally looked like they settled with the first house they found. We knocked on the door to immediately be greeted by some short, chubby guy in a white t-shirt holding a Solo cup. His shirt had sweat stains by his armpits and mid-belly area. He told us to come right in. The party itself was in a horribly dimly lit room with probably 50 guys bunched up into the living room. It was hot as hell in there to make it even worse. I think I saw maybe 2 girls at the entire party, neither of them even close to attractive. I gave the party a good 20 minutes, talking with one overweight foreigner after another, all giving off antisocial vibes. Eventually I waved for my roommate to get ready to leave, but a huge group of guys by the door made us decide to wait a little longer to avoid the awkwardness of leaving early. I continued to drink the cheap beers they were serving. I think I downed 5 cups before I could even feel a buzz. A heavy guy approached me with a tiny bottle in his hand and handed it to me, smirking and saying, "That'll get you shit-faced." I fake laughed and thanked him, expecting him to go away, but he just watched me as if he were waiting for me to drink it. So I did. It was maybe 2 shots worth of some kind of hard liquor. The guy then started making conversation with me, and every time I hinted that I was trying to get away, he would try to pull me further into this otherwise one-sided conversation. Things started to get really blurry pretty soon. I remember feeling dizzy all of a sudden, and the room seemed to be getting darker. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in a dark room, laying in a bed. I could hear the sound of music muffled behind closed doors, so I knew I was still in the frat house. It was a very dark room, however I could still make out certain furniture in the room, and a small closet door, not much else though. But even over the blaring music, I heard the sound of a plastic bag being crunched from the closet, as if somebody had stepped on it by mistake. I ran out of that room and down the stairs back to the overcrowded living room. I found my roommate and pushed him out the front door, past the group of guys still standing in a circle right next to it. During the car ride back to campus, I told my roommate I was drugged. He almost called the cops, but I said it would be foolish and pointless. My roommate then asked me an awkward question. Was I taken advantage of? I didn't feel any type of pain, and my clothes were all still on the same, so I assumed not. When I did a time check, I realized I'd only been out for maybe 10 minutes before waking up. Whatever the guy gave me must have been a dud or something, thank God. That was my college experience of attending an underground ghetto frat party, and it remains to be my scariest life experience. I had a single dorm my first semester of sophomore year. It was in the corner of the floor, kind of secluded from the rest of the dorm rooms, since it was in its own little section. You had to turn a corner to even see the door. It was nice because I'd be able to still talk with friends on my floor, invite people over to my room, and still have privacy when it was time to do homework or go to sleep. A few weeks into the semester, while studying for a bio exam, the silence was interrupted by a noise. It took me a bit to realize it was a light tapping on the door. It was so light that I almost didn't even hear it. I yelled, "Come in," but the door didn't open, so I got up to open it. Nobody was there. I walked around the corner to look down the hall. Nobody. Somebody was obviously messing with me. I went back to my bed and continued studying, this time leaving the door open. Nobody came back. The next night, a few minutes after shutting the lamp in my bedroom to go to bed, the tapping on the door returned, only this time it was much louder, more of a knocking sound. I called out, "Who is it?" and again the knocking stopped and nobody answered. I got out of my bed quickly and opened the door to see my small private corridor was void of any people. Again, I ran the 10 feet from my door to the corner to look down the main hallway of the floor. Nobody. The next morning, I asked some of the other kids in the dorm if they had been messing with me. Everyone said no. The next night, I woke up after having been asleep for 3 hours. Someone was knocking on my door again, this time louder than ever. I had trouble deciding whether to open the door or not this time. With a bout of courage, I hopped up and opened the door. Nobody was there as I was expecting, but this time I full-on sprinted down the tiny corridor isolating my room, and when I turned the corner, I saw the back of somebody disappearing behind the far corner on the opposite side of the hallway. I ran as fast as I could down the hallway, and as I turned to the next hallway where I saw the person a few seconds earlier, I saw a door at the end of the hallway shutting. It wasn't a dorm room, it was a bathroom. I felt like I was ready to confront whoever this joker was, so I pushed open the bathroom door with force. The light was off. I turned it on expecting to see somebody hiding in there, but I didn't see anyone. My first instinct was to check the 2 bathroom stalls, which were both shut. I got on my hands and knees and looked under the 2 stalls. 2 heavy black boots could be seen from underneath one of the stall doors. I took a deep breath and pushed the stall open. I was confused. There were the boots sitting on the floor, but no person to wear them. And then I heard a creepy giggling noise. Not a feminine or childlike one. It was a kind of laughing that I could only imagine to be that of a really old crazy man. For some reason my confidence was gone and I was scared shitless. Therefore, I ran back to my room and shut the door. I hopped back in my bed and started texting every friend I had. Of course, everybody was asleep though. The knocking happened one more time that night. I ignored it. It went on for about 30 seconds before whoever that person was finally gave up. I spoke to everybody on my floor the next day. Nobody else heard any knocking, and everybody swore they weren't pranking me. Everybody seemed sincere. I don't know why this person chose to harass me, or who this person was. Judging by the boots and the laughing I heard, this was an older man though, and that disturbs me. I'm a police officer in South Jersey. I've been doing this since I was 23. For the most part, it's not as exciting as it's cracked up to be. Not a whole lot happens in my county. Usually the worst calls are disturbance calls or an occasional shoplifting, with something a little more serious sprinkled in there once in a blue moon. I've done just about every possible shift there is. I did my time on the night shift, and there were definitely some weirder calls during the night shift than the day shift. But this one time I was working the night shift, I didn't get any calls. I was just cruising on a quiet road with no streetlights and woods on both sides. I saw the reflection of taillights suddenly approaching on the right-hand side of the road on the grass. As I got closer, I saw that the driver's side door was open. I started to veer onto the grass as I slowed down, fully planning on getting out to see if the driver needed assistance. I saw someone step out of the car, stand by the door for a second, then started to run into the woods. I radioed the codes for a suspicious person or vehicle.
then got out of the car with my flashlight on and my hand on my holster just in case. In this situation, I had to expect the worst. I got to the front door of the car and looked inside, half expecting to see someone else sitting there, but the car seemed empty. There was a seriously foul odor emanating from inside the car, though. It smelled like a rotting animal. I called out to the woods, asking if anybody's there and needs assistance, and I stepped to the tree line, waving the flashlight around. I went back to the car to take a closer look inside the passenger side. There were multiple bloodied tissues and paper towels on the floor on the passenger side, as well as the rear seats. They were soaked in blood. The entire papers were dark red. At some point while looking inside the car, I heard footsteps inside the woods. I spun around with my flashlight and yelled, "Come out of the woods." I didn't see anyone. Someone was hiding in there, and that was confirmed when I heard a deep voice somewhere beyond the trees and shrubs. I had no idea what the voice said. I responded saying, "Show yourself, are you hurt?" I prepared to unholster my gun as I walked a little closer. I repeated myself, asking, "Are you hurt?" No response. The voice I heard before didn't sound like a person in pain bleeding out. Additionally, why would they run into the woods upon seeing a police car? Something was way off. I went back to the car and requested assistance. I noticed as I investigated the car further that it had no plates, and when I went back inside of the rear, I found something that made me almost puke from shock. There was something heavy wrapped in bloodied paper towel. I unwrapped it with my gloves on to find a severed hand, and it took me a hot second to realize what it was, because it was completely dark red soaked in blood. Now this situation went from a 5 to a 10. I radioed that there was a possible murder and needed backup. I now put my cruiser's lights on to help other officers more easily identify my location. When backup arrived, we did a thorough search of the woods, looking for possible blood trails. Nothing though. There were not even any blood trails leading from the car, which meant that the hand and blood on the tissues I found may not have been from the person who I saw run into the woods. Eventually the canine unit had to come and search for the person. Hours upon hours went into this search, well past dawn, turning up nothing. The vehicle was taken into custody. It had been reported stolen by a resident of a nearby town, who said he had no idea who could have stolen his car. Fingerprints had been collected from the steering wheel, and DNA testing had been done on the hand. There was not a single match to anybody in the database. To this day, there was never any progress in finding out who the driver of that car was, and whose severed hand that was. My partner and I are assigned to a unit in the sheriff's department that handles tethers, or ankle monitors. One night while looking for someone that absconded the program, we followed her last known location to a somewhat shady area of our county. Not many stops are routine, but this one was unsettling from the beginning. My partner walked to the front door, as I held the side of the house, keeping my focus on him and the side of the house. After knocking on the door, we could hear movement from inside. As the door opened, a middle-aged woman slowly peered out of the door and looked directly at me. There was no way she knew where I was standing. I was not in view of any window at the front or side of the house. What was strange was that most people would answer the person at the front door, not look at the side of the house first. After a moment, she let us in after we asked if she knew who Camille was, who we were searching for. She mumbled something to the effect that she was there. Things went from 0 to 100 immediately, as she dropped to her hands and knees and started scooting on the floor yelling for Camille. This lady had some obvious mental issues, and we figured this Camille was a caretaker of some kind. We both knew the situation was off, but started searching the house. The entire time this woman was yelling for Camille, never once getting back to her feet, just kind of following us on the ground. The time must have been around 8 p.m. and it was dark outside. The inside of the home had one light on. There were no TVs or any electronics of any kind. The house had a strange feeling to it. The layout of this older style home had about 4 bedrooms and 2 floors. Every time I left a room, I swear I was in a part of the house I had not just been in. I would enter a hallway and seemingly be in another part of the house, like I entered a dimensional gap or something. The woman would sometimes be right behind me without making a sound. I was starting to question how all of this was possible. At one point, we both entered the upstairs, which looked to be a regular upstairs with bedrooms, or maybe a bathroom at the top of the stairs. As we tried to open the door, initially it would not budge. It appeared that it had been sealed somehow, like it had been painted over, and paint had dried in the seams of the door. After putting in a little extra effort, the door opened, revealing an attic, not bedrooms. If you remember Paranormal Activity, when the guy finds a picture of his wife and child in the insulation, that's what it looked like. There was nothing but storage space, insulation, and an older style light bulb with a string hanging from it. The lady was just sitting at the bottom of the stairs watching us, occasionally yelling for Camille. After what seemed like an hour of searching this house over and over again, going into rooms I swear I had just left, we called it and cleared the property. As we drove off, the woman was now standing right in front of the door, staring at us as we left. According to when we called dispatch and when we cleared, we were only there for 20 minutes. It felt like we were there for well over an hour or two. I don't know what was more unsettling, the fact that it was late at night, the lady yelling Camille's name and scooting on her hands and knees, her quietly showing up behind me when I had not heard her move, or the fact that she was standing at the door just staring at us as we left. We have not returned to that house. My family and I live throughout the middle of Georgia. Not many stories come out of this area, and this one I'm about to share makes us glad of that fact. My cousin, who I'll call Bob, has been a police officer for 5 years. He went into the force bright-eyed and optimistic, I guess like so many do. It sounds corny, but he genuinely wanted to make a difference and help improve the lives of the people in his community. One day, they got an alert from a house somewhere between Macon and Roberta. To hear Bob tell it, it was a place that people had thought was abandoned for years. Gives you an idea of the state the house was in. Anyway, when they arrived, an older gentleman was sitting on the steps outside the front door with his hand in his pockets. Bob and the other officer approached him and were alarmed to see that the man was crying. Well, not crying really, but sobbing, and he was also muttering something to himself about how awful it is. They tried to question the man, but the guy was completely incoherent. It didn't take but a couple of seconds to figure out that the poor guy was traumatized. As his partner called for another car, Bob drew his gun and decided to enter the house. The smell inside the house was overpoweringly rancid. He told me that the kitchen and living room were a total wreck. It was clear the owners of the house were hoarders. Pots and pans stacked damn near to the ceiling, spoiled food all over the table, takeout containers scattered all over the floor. Disgusting. As procedure dictates, Bob called out to see if anyone would answer. Silence. He told me that even with all his training and experience over those past 5 years, his heart rate was already building fast. Gun at the ready, he checked out the living room and saw nobody was there either. He made his way down the hall where the smell was getting much worse. Just as it all became too much, he covered his mouth and nose and opened the door to what he suspected was the bedroom. In the bed were 2 corpses, gray-skinned and covered with flies. Despite his churning stomach, Bob decided to go in for a closer look, a decision he said he's regretted since. One of the corpses was male, the other female. The skin on their faces was already starting to fall off, and the flies were flying in and out of their mouths. Some were landing and sitting on their eyeballs. As Bob inspected the female's corpse, he was horrified to find that she was holding an even smaller dead body, an infant. It wasn't until a large cockroach crawled out of the dead infant's mouth that Bob ran outside the house, doubled over, and threw up his lunch all over the steps the man had been sitting on. When the other cars finally arrived, they were able to do a more thorough inspection. The older man that Bob and his partner had met when they first arrived was a former coworker and friend of the dead man. They'd worked together at a peach packing company. The man hadn't showed up for over a week, and he'd gone to their house to see if he was okay. The poor man had been the first to see that horrible sight in the bedroom. The story that they put together was that the wife and husband had at some point become addicted to opioids. After some kind of operation a year or so before, they had started abusing painkillers together, and the addiction grew and grew until they started shooting up and snorting heroin. Their daughter, who wasn't more than a couple years old, had died of neglect. When the husband and wife discovered their baby's corpse, they finally broke completely and decided to end themselves. The coroner found enough heroin in both their bodies to kill them twice over. Bob's still on the force, but he started drinking a little too much after that. He's been going to therapy, and he's since managed to get his drinking under control. But almost every time we talk, he says that he still has nightmares about that poor child's corpse. And in his nightmares, the baby's still crying. I once responded to a call of a possible breaking and entering. A young woman living alone called in fear, saying that she came home to find a broken window downstairs, but nothing seemed to be stolen and she couldn't find anyone inside. But then when she went upstairs to bed, she thought she could hear footsteps moving around downstairs. Her call disconnected shortly after she said that, and the woman wouldn't pick up to any of the attempted callbacks. I took the call and arrived to the little house. I went to knock on the front door, and after a minute, I gave it another set of knocks and pressed the doorbell. After another minute, I tried one more time, this time banging really loudly and ringing the bell again. When there was no answer this time, I decided to inspect the house. I walked around the house, and I found the busted window. It was a window big enough to crawl through with ease. I stuck my head into the dark house and yelled, "It's the police." It was silent. I radioed to dispatch that the house seemed silent. More officers were en route, but I didn't feel right waiting around in case there was someone truly in danger in the house. I radioed that I'm going into the house through the window, and then I climbed through it. I stepped over the shattered glass into the kitchen. I drew my gun and started walking through the kitchen, hearing the glass crunching below my boots. I shouted into the house to make my presence as a police officer known to anyone who was inside. I didn't hear any footsteps, so I went upstairs, as the woman on the phone told dispatch that she heard footsteps downstairs, so that would mean her bedroom was upstairs. I wasn't trying to be too quiet as I went up the stairs, but I also wasn't stomping around. I didn't know what to expect, if someone with a weapon was in the house, or if the woman was just alone in bed. I said, "Ma'am, it's a police officer. Are you here?" And I heard back a soft female voice from upstairs saying yes. I followed the voice to one of the bedrooms, where I saw a woman sitting up in her bed under the covers. She looked at me, and I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I noticed a slight tremble in her voice. I kept the lights to the bedroom off as I looked at her. There was enough natural moonlight in the room that I could examine her facial expression. She looked distressed. I told her I was responding to her phone call, and then I asked her why she hung up and didn't pick up the callbacks. She stuttered and said no one is here. I caught on to what was going on. I looked at the closet and made a slight head nod to her. She very slightly shook her head no. I looked down under the bed and pointed, and she shook her head yes. The weight of the pressure of what to do next was 1,000 pounds. The best idea I came up with on the spot was telling her, "All right, ma'am, I just need you to sign this report form stating that I was here and there was nothing unusual." She said okay and got up from the bed and came over to me. And when she was close enough, I pushed her out of the room and then drew my gun and yelled, "Come out from under the bed." I was still shook when I saw a dark figure actually slowly coming out from under the bed. I said, "Hands first and drop any weapons." I heard the clank of something drop to the floor, which turned out to be a gun. A middle-aged man in all black clothes stepped out from under the bed with his hands up. I made the arrest on the spot and brought him outside, right around the time the other officers were arriving. The woman had hung up the phone on the police when she thought the footsteps were upstairs, and she didn't want the intruder to hear the audio from the phone call. This was also why she didn't pick up the phone, because by this point the intruder entered the room and had her at gunpoint. And since the police were already coming, for whatever reason, instead of fleeing the scene, the intruder threatened to shoot the woman if she made a sound when the police came. After I had rung the bell, he hid under the bed and told her to pretend he wasn't there. I'm glad I was able to catch on to the situation. It could have gone a number of ways if I hadn't.
So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you would expect to get on Thanksgiving night. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family, At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side. We never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something that most duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction. I only saw it open once before the two moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned before the lock would block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black. It seemed as if nobody was home. It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder, so me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. It was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before the scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex even to the other side as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window, being a sketchy snoop, when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed, and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later after our new-grown fear of those neighbors became too much. This happened when I was only 5 years old. It was Christmas Eve night, meaning I guess it was technically Christmas, and I had awoken at probably 3 a.m. or something. I walked downstairs to the living room out of my little boy curiosity to see if Santa had delivered any presents yet. The tree was full of presents underneath already. I was so happy. Santa had come already. But what was this? There was someone in the kitchen going through the fridge. I remember stepping into the kitchen and seeing a really tall man going through the fridge chugging a milk carton. When he spotted me, he put the carton back in the fridge and shut the door. He then put his fingers on his lips to tell me to be quiet. Are you Santa?" I asked him. "Yes, I am," he told me quietly. He walked past me, patted me on the head, and stepped into the living room next to the tree. I don't know what I was thinking, even at 5 years old, as he wasn't wearing anything even resembling Santa. He looked around at all the gifts. I thanked him for all the presents as he began picking up the bigger boxes. I remember being confused, and I'm pretty sure I asked him why he was doing what he was doing, but I don't remember exactly what he said. I believe it was along the lines of just replacing the gifts with better ones in my sled. I believed whatever he said though. He walks out the back door with 3 boxes, came back momentarily to grab more, then left once again. He came back in and patted me on the back and told me not to tell my parents that I saw him. I smiled and agreed, and he took off with the boxes. I waited for him to come back with the replacement gifts, but he never did. I eventually went up to tell my parents despite what he said. When my parents realized I wasn't joking, they sat up in shock and fear and ran past me downstairs. When they saw half the presents were gone and the back door was left wide open, my mom screamed like a deranged person. I remember my parents were practically scolding me, demanding for me to describe the person who entered our house. Of course, being 5 years old, the description I gave was anything but useful. All I probably told them was that he was tall. It's been almost 15 years now though, and at this point for me, being that I was only 5 years old, it's nothing but a story to tell, rather than a bad memory at all. Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys who would dress up as Santa Claus in the mall or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall with all of the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa sitting in a chair covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on the Santa's lap. Maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sat on his lap. Normally it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walked up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, he pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him, I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways, but halfway through, he stopped and told me we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me. But before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as a fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. So he and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did me. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock in the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus, but a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened.
It was a Friday or a Saturday night. I was pre-gaming with some friends at my apartment before going out to a bar in town. One of my friends called the Uber, and we were all pretty drunk, laughing and being loud with typical drunken banter. We got to the bar, and no line that night, surprisingly. At some point in the night, I asked for a girl's number who I'd been talking to. When I went into my pocket to get my phone, I realized I didn't have it on me. I checked all my pockets and confirmed this. I tried retracing my steps in the bar and asked each bartender if someone turned in a phone. I didn't remember even using my phone the whole time I'd been out though. I stepped outside the bar with one of my friends to use his phone to call mine. Someone picked up on the other end. I heard the fiddling of the phone, but they didn't say anything. I said, "Hi, where'd you find this phone?" Just breathing on the other end. I asked them if they were at the bar, but they hung up on me. I looked at my friend and tried calling again. Went straight to voicemail though. I tried using Find My iPhone, but apparently I had that feature switched off for some reason. This was a pretty sobering experience. There was no way I could have fun knowing my phone was stolen. My friends told me just worry about it tomorrow. Go to the police station and get their help in tracking it. I went home early that night. I put a couple slices of bread in the toaster before bed and found my phone on the kitchen counter. It didn't make sense. I signed into it and checked my recent calls, and indeed, someone accepted the call and it lasted for 25 seconds. Someone had been in my apartment to accept the call, that much was clear. I flipped the place upside down looking, screaming for whoever it was to come out from where they were hiding. Of course, this had a lot to do with the liquid confidence from drinking so much that night. I finally called the cops, but considering there was no real proof of any forced entry, and places to hide are basically non-existent in this apartment, they couldn't do anything besides a police report. Nothing seemed to be missing from my apartment, but going to sleep that night, knowing someone had been in my apartment, or even worse, might possibly have still been in there with me, was probably the most uncomfortable night of my life. I was 17 years old, and this happened on a late summer night. My dad and little brother had gone to a Boy Scout campout. My dad was one of the Scoutmasters. I was home alone with my mom for the weekend. She was already in bed at this point. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was just finishing up my late night gaming. I had to go to the bathroom one more time before going to sleep though. While sitting on the toilet playing games on my phone, I heard the faintest little tap on the bathroom door. "Mom, was that you?" "Mom," I yelled. It wasn't windy or anything. There didn't seem to be any logical way to dismiss it. I slowly and nervously opened the door, but there was nobody there. However, my bedroom door was now shut. I was certain I hadn't shut it. I went over to my mom's room and told her that I thought somebody was in my room. She didn't take me seriously and told me that she didn't know what to tell me. I tried to convince myself that maybe I did shut my door. I opened my door feeling extremely freaked out, and when I snuck a peek into the room, I felt like my heart exploded inside of my chest. I could see a hand sticking out from behind the dresser in the corner of my room. Somebody was hiding there. I ran to my mom's room and locked the door behind me. After quietly freaking out, telling her there's a man in the house, she finally believed me and went straight to my phone to call the cops. I put my ear up against the door to try and hear anything going on outside. I eventually heard the man's footsteps come out from my room and slowly come closer to my mom's room until making it right outside the door, then stopping. I could see the outlines of his shoes through the bottom crack of the door. He tried the doorknob, but thankfully it had a lock. It seemed the lock was enough to persuade him to give up, because I heard him stomp down the stairs and out the front door. I hurried to the window to see which way the man was heading, but he was already gone. When I was younger, 10 years old at the time, my mom had just started letting me stay home alone. We had been watching my mom's friend's dog while they were on vacation. My mom worked weeknights, so she told me that they would come around back since the dog's cage was right next to the back door, and that I would have to let them in. I sat in the den by the back door, with the dog by my side while I watched TV. He then started to growl and bark, while looking out the window to the dark. I tried to see what he was barking at, but it was too dark. Of course, I assumed it was my mom's friend coming to pick up the dog. I went over to the door with the dog following me and turned on the patio light. I couldn't see anyone out there at first, but the dog was still barking. I made sure to peek at every corner of the yard, but then I saw someone at the garden by our shed. It looked like my mom's friend. They seemed to be bending over, picking something up. I assumed she was admiring my mom's garden or something logical. I then received a disturbing phone call. I prioritized answering the phone, as my mom was strict about me always answering the phone when I was home alone. I left the dog to continue barking by the door as I picked up the phone, hoping it was my mom. And it was. She told me that her friend wasn't going to pick up the dog that night, as they wouldn't be getting home until past midnight. I began to stutter as the pure horror prohibited me from speaking coherently. I managed to finally blurt out that someone was in our yard, and my mom started screaming like a lunatic. She told me to get up to my room, lock the door, and hide under the bed while my mom called the cops. I obeyed and laid there in silence for a good 10 minutes, until I got a knock at the door. I sprang up and out of the room, making it halfway down the stairs, when I saw a face looking in through the window of our front door. This face, a guy, staring right at me. A face so unsettling that it disturbs me thinking of it today. I screamed at the guy that the police were on their way, but he didn't move. He insisted on just staring at me like a statue. I ran all the way back upstairs, tripping twice, and back to my room. I waited another few minutes before another knock came at the door, followed by a muffled shouting noise. It was the police this time. They scanned the whole premises, but the guy was gone. They took me into custody until my mom arrived at the station. After that incident, she started having a babysitter watch me again, all the way until I was 12. A long time ago, my girlfriend and I were looking for a private place to be alone together since our parents were always home. There was a vacant house on the corner of our block that hadn't been owned for years. The back door was always left unlocked. I would know because my friends and I had been in there before. We went in through the back, but before we could even get upstairs, there was a knock at the front door. We looked at each other with worry. What if someone had caught us sneaking in? She peeked out the window, but there was no one on the stoop. She made sure that the door was locked before turning back to me. I assured her it was just some kids playing ding-dong ditch. We made it only halfway up the stairs before the frantic knocking on the door came back. She checked the window again. The porch was still empty. She opened the door this time and still couldn't see anyone. I wanted to look tough to impress her, so I stepped outside and yelled at the pranksters to try it again. I shut the door and waited behind it, hands on the doorknob, ready to throw the door open. I just waited there for at least a minute, and I was about to just forget about it when I heard the blood-curdling scream of my girlfriend. I turned to see what she was screaming at, and I screamed as well. Just barely in the dark, we could see the silhouette of a huge humanoid figure very slowly making its way down the stairs. It was moving in a hovering-like motion. We ran past it just in arm's reach and left the house the way we came. We ran all the way back to my house, both of us out of breath. We know it couldn't have been an old person. They had to be at least 7 feet tall. Nobody was supposed to be living in that house, though. I even asked a friend living across the street from the house, and he said it had been vacant for years. The ghostly way the figure moved made it all the more disturbing. We both agreed to keep quiet about this story, but I still occasionally have a nightmare or bad thoughts about that night. Back in 2020, when the pandemic was still causing all kinds of chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. I was laid off from my retail job and needed quick income. The thing about rideshare gigs is you see all kinds of people, especially when you're working late nights like I was. There were awkward encounters, drunk passengers, weird conversations, but none of that compares to what happened one Friday night in October. It was a little after midnight, and I had just dropped someone off at a hotel near the outskirts of town. My app pinged almost immediately with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away, in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Pretty standard stuff. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it and started heading over. The area was quiet when I arrived, just a few dim parking lot lights. No cars in sight, and the bowling alley looked closed. But there was a man standing alone under one of the lights, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with his hands in his pockets, head down like he was looking at his shoes. As I pulled up, he looked at me, but didn't wave or move. I rolled down the window and said, "You Derek?" He nodded slowly, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip and asked him if the destination in the app was correct, an address about 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never been to. He said, "Yeah, that's right," in a quiet, calm voice. I remember thinking he sounded a little off. Not drunk or high, just sort of flat, emotionless. But I didn't think too hard about it at the time. I started driving, and he didn't say anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror now and then, and every time I looked, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window or at his phone, just at the back of my head. I tried to break the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused, then said, "Just needed to get out of there." I asked, "Out of where?" He said, "Doesn't matter." So I didn't push it. We drove a while longer. About 15 minutes in, I realized we were getting closer to the destination, but the address was in a really isolated part of town. No streetlights, big yards, and lots of trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. It looked old and abandoned, honestly. It had an overgrown lawn and paint peeling on the siding. There was also no car in the driveway. I said, "Is this your place?" And he said, "Just pull in." I hesitated, but turned into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't get out. I looked back at him and said, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and said, "Wait here." Then he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to decide what to do. The ride was technically still going. I didn't want to drive off and get penalized, but I also felt like something wasn't right. My gut told me this guy wasn't just heading inside to grab something. Finally, I ended the trip manually. I marked it as complete and started to back out of the driveway, but before I could shift into reverse, I saw him walking back toward the car, fast. His hands were empty, and he had this strange look on his face, like he was angry or excited. I unlocked the doors because I didn't want to make it a confrontation, but something in me was screaming not to let him back in. He opened the rear door, got in, and said, "Take me to the other place." I asked, "What other place?" He said, "Just drive, I'll tell you." I said, "You need to put it in the app." He didn't answer. He just stared at me in the mirror. I said again, "I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app." He didn't say a word. After a few seconds, he told me to drive to where I picked him up. I didn't want to argue anymore, so I started heading back toward the strip mall. The whole way there, I felt this pressure in the car. He wasn't talking, but I could feel him watching me. The hairs on my arms were standing up. He was still staring at the back of my head. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. I said, "Rough night?" He replied, "You could say that." I asked if everything's all right, and he said, "Not yet." I didn't ask any more questions. When we got back to the strip mall, I parked under the same light where I picked him up, but before I could say anything, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" I froze. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Not really something I think about." He didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his seat, and after a few seconds, he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out without another word. He didn't close the door right away. He just stood there for a second, half in and half out of the car. Then he looked at me and said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, too shaken to move. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. When I got home, I looked at the trip details again. Something was off. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never happened. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. They said sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know the man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the back seat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant, and if he ever found the right car. This happened in 2021 when I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that gets a lot of tourists, especially in the summer, so rideshare gigs can be decent money if you're consistent. I worked mostly nights, partly because I'm a night owl, and partly because it's less traffic and better tips from drunk passengers coming back from bars. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 in the morning, a pretty normal Saturday night crowd. I had just dropped off a group of college kids who wouldn't stop yelling in the back of my car, so I was glad to get a request that looked quieter. The name said Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street just off downtown. The weird thing was, the pin was in kind of an odd area, not near any bars or apartments, more like near the back lot of an old strip mall. But I figured maybe it was just a bad GPS marker. It happens sometimes. I drove over and saw a guy standing at the corner, hoodie on, jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris?" He nodded and got in the back without saying much. He didn't smell like alcohol or slur his words. He seemed sober and just really quiet. He didn't say hello, nor did he answer when I asked how his night was going. Some people just aren't talkers, so I didn't think much of it. I started the ride, and the drop-off was on the opposite side of town, 25 minutes away, in a suburban neighborhood I'd been to maybe once or twice before. The thing was, it was dark out there, like no streetlights in some areas. Pretty isolated. I noticed about 5 minutes into the trip that Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't texting or calling anyone. He was holding it flat in his lap with the flashlight on, just shining the beam upward, slightly toward my seat. I asked him kind of half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He just mumbled, "Yeah," and then turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were dead silent, just the hum of the engine and a weird tension building in the car. I don't know how to describe it. Something just felt off about this guy. Not threatening, but definitely unsettled, like he wasn't really there. We got to the neighborhood, and I followed the GPS to the house, but as we pulled up, I noticed it was totally dark. No porch light, no inside lights, nothing. I asked, "Is this the right place?" Chris didn't answer. He just sat there. I turned around and looked at him. I repeated myself a little louder, saying, "Hey, is this it?" He stared past me out the window. I repeated myself one more time, and finally he nodded. So I put the car in park and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there. So I asked again, "Are you good?" He finally reached for the handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He just stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I sat there waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, and then a full minute. I was just about to say something when he suddenly turned around, looked at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." I blinked and said, "Back where?" He said, "Where you picked me up." His tone was flat with no emotion. I didn't know what to say. That was a 25-minute drive, and it wasn't like I could just reverse the trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me. He begged me, saying, "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." That's when he said something that sent chills up my spine. He said, "I can't. They're not gone yet." My only response could be, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, still holding the door open, and I noticed he was breathing heavily. At that point, I started getting seriously uncomfortable. I said, "Look, I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another second, then slowly backed away and closed the door. He walked toward the house, even though it was pitch black and looked empty. I waited until he got to the porch before I pulled off. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app and started heading back toward downtown. A couple blocks down, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom and get a drink. I parked at the side of the building, went inside, and came back out maybe 4 minutes later. And when I got back to my car, I felt like my brain short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat, same hoodie and same expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, but somehow he was in the back of the car. I opened the driver's side door and stepped back in slowly, keeping my eye on him through the mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked. He just said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the cops," and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, close enough for me to hear his breath, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Something about the way he said that made me feel like he was having some kind of episode. I played along and said, "Whose house is that?" And he said, "My parents'." I asked him if he lived there, and he said not anymore. That made the hairs stand up on my neck. I started slowly driving back to where I picked him up. Every part of me was screaming not to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. As we got closer, he started breathing heavier. He was rocking slightly in the back seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." When we pulled up to the house, there were still no lights, still no signs of anyone living there. He got out without saying anything and then walked up to the front door and stood there. He didn't knock or anything, he just stood still. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then pulled away again, making damn sure the doors were locked. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes trying to process what just happened. I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things? There was no crime technically as far as I knew, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber And honestly, I regretted not reporting this to the police because the man might have been sick in the head needing help. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he actually was just having a manic episode. I'm an 18-year-old girl that lives alone in my apartment with my dog. I live about 8 miles out of town, so getting food delivered can be a hassle sometimes. I never thought anything of Uber Eats being bad. You may hear some stories, but never think they will happen to you. At least that's what I thought. It was Friday evening. I was cleaning my apartment, getting ready for my boyfriend to come over. We're long distance, so I only get to see him on weekends, so I usually try to get it cleaned up before he arrives on Saturday. I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, and it was past 6 p.m., so I was feeling hungry. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, as I just cleaned them all and cleaned the kitchen. I decided to order food so I wouldn't have to make a mess. I ordered my food and got the notification that my driver was on his way and driving a white Honda Fit Sport. I'm a young girl living on my own, so I have my delivery instructions set to leave my order at my door for contactless delivery. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food was delivered. As soon as I got that notification, I jumped up, eager to get my food. I was starving. When I opened the door to grab my food, it wasn't there, so I thought maybe he set it at the wrong door. But looking down at all the doors, none of them had the food at them. So I went back in and was gonna message him when I heard a knock at my door. It was my next door neighbor. He was holding my food. He said, "Hey, sorry, I picked up your food from your delivery driver because he was looking through your windows and I wasn't sure what he was doing." I took the food and thanked him, wondering what the hell just happened. I went back in, ate my food, and enjoyed a movie when I started to get ready for bed. I took a shower, then went to turn off my TV and make sure all my doors were locked before going to bed. I laid down in bed, called my boyfriend, and eventually ended up falling asleep. I woke up a few times during the night to my dog growling at the window or the back door. My dog isn't a huge, scary dog. He's a small 5-pound Morkie, but it's still pretty scary when he growls at something and catches you off guard. I finally got him to calm down and go back to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes later that I woke up to banging on my window. My dog started going crazy, barking, growling, and even whimpering. I couldn't move in my bed. I took the bed sheets and pulled them over my head, just leaving enough to not cover my eyes so I could see the window. I called the police and whispered into the phone quietly. I explained to the operator that someone is in my backyard and my window doesn't lock so it can easily be lifted up. She told me to go to a different room and police would be at my apartment shortly. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife, just waiting to see blue and red lights or hear sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the window of my kitchen and never expected to see what I saw. The Uber driver's car that delivered my food. His car was sitting across the street from my apartment. When you open the door to my apartment, there's a large open field to the left that's used for parking trailers and letting dogs play. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. I put 2 and 2 together and thought to myself, he's in my backyard. The police finally arrived. I could barely even speak. I was shaking and crying. I explained to one officer what happened, while the other went to check out my backyard, which is where my bedroom window is. Another officer who arrived went to check his car because it was still in the field, but he wasn't in his car. The 2 officers came back and started talking with the officer I was speaking to, telling her there's footprints in my backyard, which it had just rained the night before, so it was very muddy outside. I started panicking once I heard that, not just because that's not what you want to hear, but also because where was this guy if he didn't come back arrested with the cops and wasn't in his car? My neighbor came outside to see what was going on. The officers explained to him what was happening. Then he spoke about how he picked up my food for me earlier that day. The neighbor invited me to sleep over at his apartment for the night if it made me feel any better. Oddly, I passed on the offer, and when all the cops left, I went back into my apartment. Thinking it was all over, I took a few hours to get comfortable enough to fall asleep. But at 2 a.m., I woke up to banging on my front door and heard police. There's no way this is happening right now, I thought to myself. I got up and went to my front door, scared to open it. It was the woman I spoke to earlier. She explained they stayed at my apartment, hidden to watch for that guy in case he showed back up, and he did. They caught him walking up to my front door, thinking he was going to try to find a way in. My heart fell to my stomach when I heard her say that. She then explained he was arrested, and I don't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her, and went back to try and sleep. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep this time. I also don't use Uber Eats anymore when I'm home alone. I was 26 at the time, and I'm male. I was in Washington, D.C. on a sort of vacation visiting my then fiancée. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the story. I was visiting for a graduation she was having for her basic training. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it, so I said why not and booked a flight to be there. I'd be arriving about a week before the rest of her family, so she and I could have some time, just the two of us, before she would be busy with having all of her family there for the occasion. She stayed with me at my hotel during this time, and eventually we decided we wanted to go and explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington had to offer. I'd never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest, and we decided to do it. Once we arrived at our location, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sights, from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It really was a fun and exciting experience for myself to see all these places, as I had missed out on going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Sarah at the time seemed to appreciate my interest in them as well, and we really enjoyed ourselves. After we finally decided we had enough walking around and were ready to return to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call for a ride. We had used it earlier to arrive and had no issues, so we decided to just use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone, while I sat down under some shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we did, and I could feel my body just ready to get back to the hotel for a long-needed nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us along the side of the road. Sarah motioned for me that this was the car, as the place they stopped at was not a parking spot or a place a car would just stop at on its own. I stood up and followed her to the car, where she opened the back door and stepped inside, asking the man, "Uber for Sarah?" And he gave a slight nod without saying anything. So I followed her into the car and shut the door behind me. Now looking back on this, I realized how stupid both her and myself were in doing this. We should have asked for the driver's name and verified the car was a match to the one on the app. I didn't have access to any of this myself, and she made the request on her phone, so it didn't really cross my mind at the time to do any of this. As we both sat in the back of the car, which was a gray-colored minivan, the driver didn't speak to us. I found this a bit odd, as any other driver I'd ever had would at the very least greet me once I entered or confirmed my name. But this guy, nothing. He started driving without acknowledging either of us, other than the nod he gave when Sarah asked him if he was our Uber. And I did pick up on how weird it was, but I was tired and didn't really feel like trying to engage with the man myself. I laid my head back and just closed my eyes. I then felt a tap on my arm from Sarah after what felt like only 5 minutes of the drive. I opened my eyes and looked at her, and she didn't speak to me. I could see the look on her face was one of worry, and it had me wondering what exactly she was concerned about. She then pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber would take to drive us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that the way we were going was not the way the route had said. In fact, it was the opposite way. I could see Sarah's face drain with color shortly after, when a notification popped up on her phone saying our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. It was then I realized how dumb I was by not verifying the car and driver before we just both stepped in. The picture that was on Sarah's phone within the app did not match the driver, and I knew we had gotten ourselves into a situation. I slowly looked back towards the driver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were, or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I just knew at that moment, I had to get both Sarah and I out of that car. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and would be fine just being let out where we were in an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man of what we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror in the first actual acknowledgement of us he had given since we stepped into the vehicle. I caught his glance as he stared at me without saying a word in what felt like minutes, but was probably only 10 seconds. He didn't stop the car though. He didn't even say a word in response to me, and just kept driving the car as if nothing had been said. My patience had run out, and I knew whatever this man had in store for us wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of at that moment, and reached into my pocket, pulling out my pocket knife. I flipped the blade out, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what your plan is here, or what you think you're about to do to us, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull this car over right now, I have no problem using it." The driver's eyes quickly looked at me again within the rearview mirror, and I knew he could see the knife gripped tightly in my hand. He quickly pulled the van over, and I heard the doors unlock. Sarah and I wasted no time in getting out of that car as fast as we could. The moment we were both out, the man sped off. We quickly took a moment to gather ourselves, as Sarah was having a panic attack, and I myself was still wrapping my head around what the hell just happened. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and responded to our actual Uber driver, and informed him of our location and asked if he could come pick us up. The actual driver arrived within a few minutes, and this time we made sure it was the right one. We told him everything that had happened, and it was then that he informed us something that made the blood in my veins go cold. He told us there had been multiple instances recently where people were posing as Uber drivers in the area, as it was an easy way to find many tourists and people not from the area that wouldn't think twice about just getting into a car thinking it was a Lyft or Uber. Apparently, many people had gone missing, and they could only assume the worst. He told us both we were lucky we noticed when we did, and hadn't gotten further away from where we had been picked up, which was probably the only reason the man let us go, and of course the fact that I was armed. We made it back to the hotel without issue, and we quickly reported it to the police. We gave the best description of the man and the car that we both could, and the police told us they'd call us with any information they could find. We never heard back from them, so I assume the man was never caught or found, and that worries me that he could still be out there doing this to others. Again, I realized how stupid we both were after all this, not verifying whose car it was we were getting into, but let this be a reminder to everyone listening, do just that. Always verify your Uber drivers, and always make sure you're aware of your surroundings.
I was taking a road trip in my Mustang from Texas to Arizona to visit my brothers. I usually keep emergency supplies in the trunk, such as water and tools. I was taking, I guess, what you would call a scenic back route, because I liked flying at high speeds with the top down without worry of other cars or police. This was one of those completely deserted seeming roads with one lane on either side and nothing but desert sand, cacti, and shrubs as far as the eye can see. I was flying down this road when the car started to emit these concerning popping noises from under the hood, and the car started to jolt or jump slightly. I put a heavy foot on the brakes to bring the car from a speeding 90 miles per hour to a less than gradual halt. I got out from the car, popping the hood, pretending as if I'd even know what to expect or how I'd go about fixing it. There was no smoke, nothing like that, but I didn't have a clue what could be the problem. I got back in my car to try and start it, and as I feared, the damn thing wouldn't even start back up now. The car was an '01 Ford Mustang, so yeah, it was an old car with its share of problems. Naturally, I tried to call my roadside service company, but bad became worse, realizing I didn't have any service this far out in the desert. I was more or less stranded. I hadn't seen a single other car pass me that whole hour I was driving on that road, and I was scared to think how long it would take for someone to pass. I waited on the side of the road, sitting on my car's trunk for literally hours, sweating my ass off. My spirits rose when I saw the shine of a car reflecting the sunlight speeding down the road in the horizon. I hopped off my trunk and started walking and waving my arms out for help, but the car didn't stop. It zoomed past me. Pure evil. I didn't know how somebody could leave another human being stranded like that. Nightfall came and the hunger was setting in. No cars had passed since the first, and I was trying to fill my stomach with the water bottles I had in my trunk. Eventually, I saw headlights approaching. I had my car's hazards on, but I also waved my arms once more. The truck pulled to the side, and a fairly large man stepped out. I told him my car broke down and asked if he knew anything about cars, but he didn't immediately seem interested in my car. He more so seemed interested in asking me if I was alone, where I was going, and why I didn't just call for help. Then he asked me if anyone knew I was here. These questions were certainly making me uncomfortable. He finally offered me a ride, though if he was trying to make a point of making me uncomfortable, he accomplished that. I stepped up into his pickup truck, and off we started driving. He said it would be a long while before either of us would have phone service. He started asking me more questions, like why I would decide to take a back route like this. Minutes in, the truck started to slow down, and I heard him mutter, "Ah, shit." He pulled onto the sand on the side of the road, looked at me, and said the piece of crap broke down. This couldn't be happening. I looked back at the man and realized he was still looking at me. Like 5 seconds went by and he was just still staring at me. He finally asked me to go lift up the hood once he would crank the latch. I can only describe this whole situation so well, but through everything up until this point, I was insanely suspicious. I went in front of his truck with a bit of distance between the front and I, and waited to hear a click, meaning the truck's hood was unlatched. In my head, I was picturing him trying to run me over, and that's exactly what happened. As I took one step towards the truck to try and open the hood, I heard the roar of the engine as the man was on the gas. I dove for my life. If I reacted half a second later, I'd have lost my legs or instantly been killed. I took off running into the pitch black night, looking back to see the taillights still there. And then this. Gunshots. Surely gunshots aimed at me. That man was trying to kill me. It was too dark out there for him to possibly shoot me dead without some kind of luck, but I thought I was going to die at any moment. I ran as far as I could, then dove and made myself as low to the ground as possible. I heard a truck speeding off in the distance, so I turned and saw the taillights of the truck slowly disappearing down the empty road. I eventually fell asleep on the side of the road, and the nightmare didn't end until early morning, when I woke up to another pickup truck passing by. I waved them down, covered in dirt and sand, and thank God this man was actually normal, he and his wife. They gave me water and drove me to the nearest town where I was able to call the towing company. It was a 45-minute drive back to my car on that goddamned road, then that same distance back to bring it into a shop. Long story short, this was the worst trip and experience of my life. Having someone try to run you over and then shoot at you isn't something you simply get over. There were these woods by my parents' house that I would like to walk through a lot. I found this one very small circular clearing in the woods. It sat by a small, calming stream of water, and it had a big rock in the center that I'd like to sit on and read my books. I guess you could say I was a loner child. One day, like any other, I walked to the circle, sat on the rock, opened my book to the bookmark, and resumed my novel. It wasn't exactly midday. It was approaching the end of the day, so it was getting slightly darker in the woods. I was interrupted by footsteps behind me. I set down my book and went into the trees to see if there was a deer or other animal nearby. Black bears are what always worried me as a kid. I heard more footsteps, so I followed quietly in that direction. Whatever it was moving fast. Faster than I possibly could while trying to remain quiet. The footsteps disappeared. I figured the animal got too far away, but as long as it wasn't interested in bothering me, I didn't care what it was. I started walking back to my circle, but as soon as I got a view of it between the trees, my heart dropped to my stomach. There was someone sitting on my rock, back to me, but I could tell they were holding my book. I didn't know whether to approach or not until the man said out loud, "I don't like this book," and turned to me, as if he knew exactly where I was standing, even still behind a few trees. He said, "I watch you come here a lot." He had on this weird smile that immediately made me even more uncomfortable. My 13-year-old self didn't have a fight or flight response system. I only had a flight response instinct. The man stood up and took 1 or 2 steps towards me, and I started running. I knew the way back to my house easily. I was there after a couple minutes of running. That night, I got a knock at my window. I woke up terrified and screamed for my dad. My dad came rushing in, and when I told him, he went outside to check. I was horrified when he came rushing in. And when I told him, he went outside to check. I was outright disturbed when he came back in with my book that I left in the woods. He said it was left outside my window. I slept in my parents' room for like a week after that, and needless to say, I never returned to that circle in the woods. I had taken a job working for a company based in the mountains. They offered me a cottage to stay in while working there. It was an old home built into the side of a mountain and surrounded by the forest. I lived in the basement, which had been converted into a small living space with a bathroom, kitchen, sleeping area, and a laundry room. The laundry room was L-shaped and had a door that went out back and into the surrounding forest. The door that led to the forest was locked from the inside and was quite difficult to open. I never used that door and always kept it locked. The rest of the house was empty, but I didn't have access to it. After a day of work, I returned to my little basement for an evening reading and playing solitaire. I turned off my lamp and started to nod off when I heard a noise. The noise was like wood creaking. I played it off as my imagination, but then it repeated. I thought maybe one of the cabinets in the kitchen was latched improperly and swung open. I checked, but all the cabinets were secured. I opened my closet, thinking maybe something in there had made the sound. But again, nothing. The last place to look was the laundry room. I opened the door that connected the house to the laundry room and was instantly hit by a gust of cold night air. I slowly turned the corner and witnessed the door that led to the outside just swaying in the nighttime breeze. I am 100% certain I had this door closed, and like I said earlier, there is no way it could open on its own. I don't know what happened. Was there someone waiting in the laundry room, just waiting for me to fall asleep before sneaking out? Was it something supernatural? Either way, there are few times I had ever felt such genuine horror. Tennessee has some real characters out in nature. I hiked all around while in school there. Made some good memories with a girl in the enveloping nature. Tennessee has good roads to popular hiking sites and tons of mini trails branching off. Sometimes you need to know what to look for as far as trail markers go, because the interesting ones are always a good ways out. There's one spring waterfall that spills across a mossy granite wall, towering over a shallow stream that empties into a decent-sized pond. I went out there with a friend last time, and we got separated on the way out. I have no freaking clue how that happened. We've each been hiking for over 10 years. I've run over it 1,000 times in my mind, and it has to be this one ledge system. To get to the top of the fall, you need to take a longish detour that has an old wooden railing and a 3-way branching ledge system. So I've taken all 3 routes and ended up at the same spot. They take maybe 3 to 4 minutes to blast through, and they're kind of like rocky corridors. I don't take the left one anymore, because I'm 90% sure these big stains in the middle are blood. Don't want to know what happened there. It's odd because the left is by far the most inviting. Flowers bloom from vines that are etched into the moss-matted bedrock. Anyways, I'm 45 seconds ahead of her, and opt for the right path when I realize I should tell her to avoid the left. It's really hard to reverse given the sloping angle of the path and a few short drops that become narrow climbs. Screw it. Faster if I speed through and yell down. I get out of the right corridor and swing around to where the middle path drops off. I yell, but no reply. So she took left. I run over and climb into the left corridor, thinking she saw the stains and freaked out. To be fair, it looks like someone got bludgeoned to death. I ran up the corridor, but she was gone. I called her name, nothing. And that's what made my hair stand up. I literally heard nothing. No birds, no hum of the forest, not even wind. Just myself and the babbling water. I traced left all the way back, and noted a few side passages if you miss a couple of the jumps. No bodies were in there or the middle, though. Good. I figure I may as well get to the top of the falls where I can get somewhat of an aerial view. I get there, and Ashley's sitting there waiting for me. She says she took the left path with the trail guide. What? There are no trail guides. There are rangers, but she knows the difference. They would not be in the rock labyrinth. This guy had a uniform and a trail authority visor on. She knew what I was thinking based on my face, and agreed that we should reverse course ASAP without us saying anything out loud. It's weird when you know you're being watched. We pretended we were going back to the car real quick to get more water, and so I left some fish food in a little crevice like I always did, and we left. She showed me this weird side passage that could not have existed a year before. I walked all the way around. You had to crouch, but you could walk through the labyrinth if you kept left, though. Hindsight, we shouldn't have taken another way. I think he lives in those tunnels. Ashley said he kept trying to lead her in a different direction, but she just followed the light and saw him standing in the tunnel as she walked the rest of the trip to the top. That means he was in there while I was looking for her. And that means she followed him before seeing the blood splatters all over the floors and walls. And that's not the totally fucked up part. The fish food that I left in the crevice was on the hood of my car. Her water bottle was gone too. She had a carabiner to her pack, so he must have snuck up and taken it at some point. That's strange because we're fast hikers. We never went back there and never will. I live in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It was a Tuesday night. I was laying on my bed trying to get some sleep. I laid there for about 3 hours until I decided to get up and take a walk around my neighborhood just to clear my head. It was 2 in the morning. I was walking down the street when I remembered there's an abandoned building in our neighborhood. I decided to visit it. People say that this building is haunted, and I've always wanted to see what's inside of it. The building itself looked really creepy. Broken windows, a huge metal door which said no entry with red paint. As an 18-year-old college student, I wanted to be adventurous. I climbed through one of the broken windows and got inside the building. I took out my phone and started to record so I could show off in front of my friends. Just to let you guys know, my phone works completely fine. There's no problem with it. The place was really dark. The only source of light in that building was from my phone. It took me a couple of seconds to realize I was inside a small room. I walked out the door into the hallway. It was an apartment. I was doing commentary while recording to make it look cool. I got out of the apartment and into the main hall of the building. Here's a picture of the main hall. On the left side of the elevator, there's a small passageway which leads to a really small room under the stairs, as seen in this picture. I went there to investigate. When I got close to the room, I heard a clicking noise from the first door. I was frozen for a split second. I walked back to the main hall still recording. Then I heard a loud sound of metal dropping on concrete. I almost crapped my pants. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but something inside me told me to go upstairs and find out what it was. I started walking up the stairs as slowly as I could. I don't even know what I was expecting to see up there. I got to the first floor. As usual, it was dark, but it got colder. This event took place in the middle of August, so it was hot outside. I'm into paranormal stuff, and when I suddenly felt cold, I firmly believed something was going on here. I should have turned back, but I still wanted to see where that sound came from. There were 4 apartments on each floor. I investigated all 4 of them and saw nothing. A chill ran down my spine when I realized the whole second floor and the ground floor were covered in sand. There was no concrete and no sign of anything metal. The cold temperature on the floor and the fact that I was alone gave me the chills. I hurried down the stairs, made my way back to the apartment, climbed out through the window, and ran back to my home. When I got home, I drank gallons of water, calmed myself down, and took out my phone. I wanted to hear that sound again, so I played the video, and to my horror, the audio in the video was messed up. My commentary wasn't there at all. Like I said earlier, there's no problem with my phone. It works fine. I didn't get any sleep that night. I told my friends about it, and they told me that it was really stupid to go inside that building alone.
I didn't delete the video, I decided to keep it as a memory. Fast forward to December. I was going through my gallery and I came across that video. I decided to play it. I fast forwarded to the part where I heard the sound, and surprisingly, that sound is clearly heard in the video. I don't know how it could be heard clearly, but here's a small clip from the video. I got goosebumps and closed my phone. I promised myself not to go near that building ever again. Let me start out by saying I was a non-believer of the paranormal until this night. I was with 4 buddies. I won't list any names for safety reasons. We went to hang out and talk in an old, supposedly haunted trailer late at night. The owner and multiple people who lived there all told me that it was haunted by demons, and me being the new guy to the group, I needed to be initiated. This initiation consisted of walking into the haunted back room. I did as they said after they convinced me, and walked in and then quickly ran out. My friends thought it was hilarious and went to prove to me that it was all not real. I went behind them to record them and see if we could get any proof of the demon. My friend went to open the closet, and that's when I got spooked by a loud audible crash in the closet and ran away. My friend thought it was hilarious, and after more convincing, dragged me back inside the house to record him. My buddy and I got outside of the trailer to rewatch our footage, and what we caught scared me beyond belief.
Dude, I just heard shit in the closet. Yo, bro. Oh, fuck! Hey. What the fuck? Oh, shit! Oh, fuck me, fuck. Fuck! Look at this fucking video! Chase, look at this!
Dude, I saw it.
Fuck me, fuck! Get the hell out of there, dude!
The closet opening and closing, loud knocking and windows being tapped on. All the while I captured orbs outside of the room. While I was outside waiting for my friend to come back out, I heard the trash cans rattle and immediately called my friends out. We didn't see them move, but a little later on we had things thrown at us from an unknown place. I had a live bullet tossed into my leg, and one more land inches away from my buddy's leg.
I have it on video. You were making that shit. Wait, if you're there, then who's throwing shit?
Huh? I just came back from smoking with Roy.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
They just passed by, I took a hit and they kept walking.
We have actual fucking proof of that ghost.
Eventually we went to get out after I practically dragged my friend into the car, only to have our car alarm go off as we opened the car door. When we got home, my buddy showered and said his back hurt, and when I checked, I saw he had multiple scratches up and down his back, as you can see in this image. It was a normal evening. My best friend and I decided to go for a walk. It was around 10 o'clock in the evening, so it was as dark out as it was going to get. I live in a small village, so we usually just walk around the streets. There weren't many people out at this hour. We were kind of just walking and talking. A little while into our walk, we started to head home. We went up some hill, which led to the little town area and the only store we had in our village. But as soon as we came up the hill, we saw a weird-looking figure in the distance. It looked like an abnormally tall woman covered in a sheet of some sort, and it had its neck tied with a string or a rope. This is the video we took of the figure. Honestly, it reminded us of the movie The Nun. It was really hard to see since it was totally dark and the streetlights weren't exactly the brightest. It was moving very slowly, and it was waddling left and right like it was drunk or injured or something. We couldn't figure out if it was walking our way or not because it was moving so slowly. It was a really disturbing sight at that moment at that hour of the night. After half a minute of standing there, we realized it was walking towards us. We ran as fast as we could when we realized it didn't even have a visible face or just anything to take note of specifically. We walked around to go home, hoping we wouldn't see her again, but we thought we would, because if we calculated it right, we would meet again on one intersecting street, but luckily we didn't. The next day, I told my friend about what happened, and she told me she also saw her, or it, while she was driving with her sister past the bar, which is on the street we thought we would see her again. She moved slower than us, and I really don't know how we missed her, but luckily we did. My friend described the figure just as horrifically as it appeared from the distance to us that night, and since that night, we never saw her again. This just happened a couple days ago. This isn't something that happened to me, but rather something that happened to a family friend. Our family friend, who I'll call Buddy for the sake of this video, believes that something has attached itself to him, something paranormal. It started when he moved into a new house. Almost right away, Buddy and his family started experiencing paranormal activity, such as shadows and voices. One night, Buddy had found a weird discovery in the basement of his new home. Upon doing some moving in the basement, he found something that he had not seen prior to the move-in. He found a stolen cemetery wreath. This made partial sense because the town cemetery was in walking distance of the house. Buddy was aggravated with the activity going on in his new home, so out of anger, he snapped the cemetery wreath, and in his own words, "When I snapped the wreath, every dog in that town started howling. There must have been 20 dogs all howling at the same time. I was scared to death." After that, the activity worsened, and they had no choice but to move. But it seemed the activity followed them to every house they went to. Recently, they've had some of the worst experiences in this apartment they currently live in. Buddy and his wife, who I'll call Pam, have been repeatedly followed by some kind of entity. They decided to set up a phone recording for the night and try to capture anything that might seem paranormal as evidence that they weren't crazy. What Buddy found on the phone was horrifying. He woke up at 3 to review some footage and found a 5-second video that had been taken after the previous recording had stopped. Keep in mind, they have no pets, no children that live with them, no TV or radio was on at the time, and both Buddy and Pam were in bed when this happened. You can clearly see something pick up the phone and a female voice speak into it. I can assure you that is not Pam's voice or any other voice that they're familiar with. Everyone thinks it says, "Did you tell Daddy to rape me?" But you guys take a listen for yourself and come to your own conclusion.
You tell Daddy you raped me?
Almost a night after this recording, one of Buddy and Pam's daughters died from an overdose. She was 30 years old and 7 months pregnant and a mother of 4, getting ready to be 5. Could this video have something to do with it? We don't know. But if it is a coincidence, then it sure is one hell of a scary one.
There was this time long ago that I was in charge of watching my cousin and his 4 friends while they slept over. My uncle was paying me $100 to watch them for the night. All I did was play video games with a bunch of 10-year-olds for most of the night. I thought it would be the easiest $100 I ever made, but things took a huge turn for the worse when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. We were in the basement still playing video games. 2 of the kids also heard the sounds. I counted 5 kids sitting on the couches, and neither my aunt or uncle were supposed to be home that night. I swallowed my gum when I realized the basement door was wide open. I told them to stay there while I ran upstairs to shut the door. The door didn't have a lock from the inside, only the outside. I called to the kids to hide in the workout room. I shut the TV and all the lights and then followed the kids into the workout room. We listened in the dark as the footsteps approached the basement door, and then the horrible sound of the basement door opening, followed by heavy steps stomping down each stair one by one. One of my cousin's friends were crying. I had to tell them to shut the hell up. I leaned against the door with a chair along with a bunch of barbell weights wedged against it. I listened as the door to the boiler room was opened, and a few moments later, closed. Screams of children filled the room as the doorknob to the workout room began to turn. I pushed the door with all my might to keep it shut. Whoever was on the other side quickly gave up as we heard rushed footsteps going up the stairs. I heard the footsteps right above our heads moving in the direction of the front door. This was before everybody had cell phones, so calling somebody first wasn't an option. I scanned the whole house, finding that the front door had been left open and all the bedrooms upstairs had been trashed. Nobody was in the house, so I called the kids up. A few things had been stolen, but as long as nobody was hurt, we were all happy. It was during a blizzard in Valley Stream. I was getting paid $250 to watch some couple's kid while they went away for the weekend. His name was Matthew. This took place on the first night, which was a Friday night. Matthew was already supposedly asleep, while I was in the living room watching a movie. I got a knock at the door, and looked at the clock. It was close to midnight. There was no way I was opening it. Not even 10 seconds later, I heard the sound of 2 or 3 men angrily banging on the door, telling me to open up. I felt like my heart was about to stop. I took a peek through the blinds, and there was somebody standing right on the other side of the window. I fell back in fear, and after managing to get back on my feet, I ran to the kitchen phone first thing to call the police. They said because of the weather, it could take a while for an officer to get here. I was told to take the child and hide somewhere until an officer arrived. They wanted to keep me on the line, but I wasn't thinking clearly in the heat of the moment and hung up. However, it wasn't until I ran through the living room that I realized the banging had stopped. I took a second peek through the living room window. Nobody was there now. I heard the sound of glass shattering from a few rooms over. My knees started to feel weak as I realized they had just broken the window and were about to climb into the house. I had to run and get Matthew. I couldn't just leave without him. Of course, when I got upstairs, there was no time left to run back downstairs, as I already heard footsteps and laughter coming from downstairs. I covered Matthew's mouth with my hand as I ran with him into his toy closet. A few minutes dragged on to what felt like half an hour as we sat there in the dark closet. Matthew began to squeal as footsteps on the carpet reached the outside of his bedroom door. There was more than one person. They came inside. There weren't many places to hide in this room. I was actually reflecting on my whole life, so sure I was gonna die. We heard the sound of a police siren outside, even from in the closet, and then I heard one of the men in the room mutter, "Aw, shit." I opened the door back up as I heard at least 3 pairs of footsteps hurriedly rushing down the stairs. They didn't get far, as the police later found their footprints in the backyard, leading to our shed. There were 5 men in total, and they were all arrested. I was 15 years old, still babysitting since I couldn't get a real job. This was by far the most horrifying experience of my life. Me and this kid I was babysitting, his name was Mike, were taking a walk with his dog through the woods in his backyard. His dog stopped, ears pointed up straight, and paw in the air. The dog started barking, pulling, and going crazy. He noticed something, and we were nervous that it was a black bear, so I told Mike to turn around and walk back to the house. I struggled to pull the dog in the other direction, and then I noticed what he was barking at. Beyond a big tree was some guy just standing there, staring up at me. I yelled out, asking to him if he needed something, and with that, he turned around and walked off. I was genuinely freaked the fuck out. The dog calmed down at this point, so walking back was easier for a few minutes, until yet again, the dog started freaking out about something behind us. I couldn't see what it was, but I was worried it was the same guy as before, and that he might have been following me. I was tempted to unleash the dog on this guy, but that seemed like a bad idea. I didn't look back for the rest of the way back to the house, but the dog continued to bark and pull. I did the best I could to run, or at least walk fast. I made sure for a good half hour that we weren't followed to the house, checking every window and door routinely. I thought it was safe to eventually play Mario Kart with Mike and forget about what happened, but my worst fear came true when right outside the window in the patio, I heard the sound of one of the toy buckets falling over. Turning on the patio light, I could see that a green bucket full of beach toys and balls had been knocked over. There was no way some small animal could do that. The dog was once again going crazy, barking at something. I told Mike to get me his dad's hunting rifle. Maybe that was dumb to have an 8-year-old get a gun for me, but I didn't have time to think rationally. There continued to be strange noises coming from all around the outside of the house. There was some taps on the windows, chimes being pushed, things falling over, but I eventually caught a glimpse of him through one of the windows. He was walking past until he noticed me and stopped. I lifted the gun up to show him that we were armed. He didn't run away right away though. He stood there crouched like some kind of creature, staring right into my soul. He finally walked back into the woods. I didn't sleep much that night, jumping at every small cracking noise. A week later, I got a call from Mike's parents. They told me a creepy-looking man had been stalking their house from the woods. They asked me to describe what the man that I saw looked like again. I couldn't give a good description, as I didn't see much of his face, but I assured them it was the same man. They practically begged me to babysit on a few occasions after this, but I always respectfully declined. That was a while ago, and I have no idea what's become of this family today, and what's become of the man stalking their house. I would frequently babysit back between the ages of 15 and 18. I lived close to a relatively wealthy area where people were more generous in terms of pay. There was never a shortage of need for babysitters either, so I made a decent amount of money. I've definitely had to take care of some stranger kids, but this one takes the prize. Right from the moment I met Michael, he seemed really quiet and weird. He was 12 years old too, which some might argue is more than old enough to be home alone, but maybe not overnight. They needed me to stay overnight. His parents told me he could be a bit strange sometimes and may need some extra attention. I didn't really need to do much though. In the room that I would be sleeping in was a huge toy closet, big enough to fit a big Lego play table with a bunch of Legos and other toys sitting on top of it. Michael was up there for most of his time building with Legos and other toys. I didn't really spy on him too much, I just let him do his own thing. But I heard him constantly talking in there, as if someone were with him, not play talking. I could only assume he had some kind of problems, and that's what his parents were hinting at. He came down eventually to eat some of the leftovers in the fridge, but then went right back up to his closet. It wasn't until I finally told him it was time to go to sleep that he left the closet. I just wanted to go to sleep myself. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to sounds coming from the closet. Sounds of toys, like Legos. I called out to Michael to go to sleep. The sound stopped. The light wasn't on in the closet, so I was confused as to how the hell he could be playing in the dark. I went over to open the closet and turn the light on. Michael didn't seem to be in there. I dismissed the noises. I wasn't a paranoid person. I fell back asleep. I'd say an hour later, I woke up to partial brightness in the room. The closet light was on, but the door was shut. I called Michael's name again. I was pissed now. I saw the outlines of feet at the bottom of the closet door, and then heard a little giggle as if Michael were messing with me. I knew he was in there now. I marched over and threw open the door, and literally fell back in horror when nobody at all was in there. Where the two outlines of feet were, there was nothing now. I felt a pain in my chest from the fear. I ran to Michael's room to find him asleep in his bed. I locked his door and laid down on his floor. Just being next to another person made me feel a little safer. I fell asleep on the floor, and when the parents returned the next day, I decided to keep quiet about what I witnessed. I say what I witnessed because I know what happened. I got paid and left, and never had to worry about it again. Of course, it still sends chills up my spine thinking about it, and I still have no idea what to believe.
My dad always loved going crazy with the Christmas lights when I was young. He was an overachiever with it, and I always had to have the most impressive display on the block. The year of 2010 was no exception. He set the lights up on timers so that they'd flash along to certain Christmas songs, which was becoming a popular trend in 2010. We had a bunch of onlookers and people stop by and take videos. My dad always ate that up. This was on a night where there was a light snowfall, and it was below freezing out, so not the weather a lot of onlookers would want to come and check out the display. There were a couple that we noticed, a woman and then a man. The woman left after a few minutes. The man stayed and admired it. We saw a smile on his face. He stayed for quite some time actually, and I knew my dad loved that. Eventually it got late, and it started snowing a little heavier, so my dad pulled the plug on the lights for the night. Quite literally pulled the plug. The lights and music outside stopped, and on that note, that meant the night was approaching its end. Everyone went upstairs to shower or brush their teeth or do whatever they had to do. I went to my room upstairs and looked out the window, as a curiosity thing to see how many people still had their lights on at this hour. Only a couple houses. But I picked up on more than just that. That man who was admiring the lights was still outside on the sidewalk facing the house, even though all the lights were now off. I called my dad over, a bit confused and concerned. He came to the window with me and looked out. "What do you think he's doing?" I asked. "I don't know," my dad said. We both assumed the guy might be waiting for the lights to turn back on. Either that or he may be loony, or both. My dad said just lower the blinds and ignore it, he'll go away eventually. I brushed my teeth, got some water, then turned off my light and climbed into bed. I heard the little flakes of snow tapping on the window, a sound I always found very relaxing, but I wasn't relaxed. I was wide awake and curious. I had to look out my window. I pulled the blind up just a little to sneak a peek outside. The man was gone, but I could see footprints in the snow on our front lawn, which started from the sidewalk. Curiosity got the best of me. I tiptoed downstairs to the front door, which has 3 square glass windows at the top of it. I peeked through that glass, and I wish I hadn't. He was standing on the other side of the door, looking at the glass window, a big smile on his face, accentuating his crow's feet and smile lines. He had a mustache and was wearing one of those old-time wool caps and a large black coat. He had a look of crazy in his eye. For that brief couple of seconds I looked at him before falling back screaming. Everyone came out of their rooms in response to my screams. I pulled the front door open for my dad to see. The man wasn't on the stoop anymore, but we saw him quickly walking across the street into the park. My dad, brother, and I all rushed to put on our shoes, skipping the coats so to not waste time. We chased after him by following his footprints into the park. I was so cold it felt like thousands of icicles were stabbing my body. We got across the street to the park and went into the trees, but following the footprints got harder under the trees as less snow had accumulated, until there was not enough snow at all to even leave footprints in. We had to give up and run back home to warmth. Technically, we don't know if that man did anything illegal, just downright disturbing and creepy. Maybe he was messing with my family, maybe he was mentally ill. None of these questions will ever be answered, though. I was on my way home from working a graveyard shift on Christmas Eve night. It was a snowy night. The roads were icy and slippery. I was driving slow and cautious, listening to Christmas music. There were next to no cars on the road at all, just the occasional snowplow truck. I was on a quiet service road when I came to a red light. There were 2 cars in front of me. The light quickly turned green, but the cars didn't move. I'm not the type to honk, if ever, but after 30 seconds of neither of the cars moving, I finally tapped on the horn. Still nothing. The car in front of me wasn't even honking at the car in front of him. Another 20 seconds passed, and I honked again. I noticed someone on the sidewalk watching this happen. I thought he must be thinking, what an asshole, whoever's in the front car. We were sitting there so long now that the light changed to red again. Like I said, I'm not the type to honk, so I'm definitely not the type to get out of my car and confront someone. But this was too much. I was exhausted and wanted to go home. I got out from my car and walked over to the car in front of me, which for the record was still on. Both of them were. When I knocked on the window, I looked inside. The car was empty. I walked to the car in front of it, and it was empty too. There was no way to explain this. 2 running cars blocking a lane. No one inside either of them. No signs of an accident or anything. I was ready to ask that guy on the sidewalk if one of these cars were his, but when I looked in the direction where he was standing, he wasn't there anymore. The light turned green. Okay, whatever. I was going to drive around them on the opposite side of the road and be gone. So that's what I did. I was way too unsettled to stick around there. A few blocks down, I saw a cop car parked in an empty parking lot. Unfortunately, I missed the entrance, so I started honking my horn and flashing my lights to get his attention, and it worked. He turned his car on and exited the parking lot to pull up behind me on the road. It felt like he was pulling me over, kind of, because he exited his car to walk up to mine. I didn't leave my car as a respect thing, I guess. I lowered my window and told him about the 2 weird abandoned cars back there and how they were obstructing traffic. He thanked me and said he'd check it out. Then his attention turned to something in the back seat, and he said, "Why is he laying on the floor like that?" "What?" I said. I turned around and saw a hooded man laying on the floor of my car. I screamed in front of the cop. I stepped out and yelled at the cop that I didn't know him. The cop drew his gun and ordered the guy to step out with his hands raised. He did so. When the man was in handcuffs, I recognized him as the guy standing on the side of the road. So I told the cop. The cop called for backup. He shook my hand and told me he'd take care of the rest, and to get home safe, and we wished each other a Merry Christmas. I drove home with a mix of emotions, but that Christmas, all I know is I had a newfound appreciation for police officers. My wife and I live in a duplex in Queens, New York. Last month, 2 upper middle-aged women moved in next door. We never had the chance to greet them the first few days. They seemed very quickly in and out at first. On, say, the 4th day, I caught one of the women carrying a box from her car into her side of the house, so I walked out to finally greet her. Her name is Frances, and she seemed normal enough, but she also seemed like she was in a hurry, so I didn't steal too much of her time. The next day was Christmas Eve, so my wife and I were preparing to host my sister and their families. During our Christmas Eve dinner, which was going completely normal, we all went silent and looked at the door when we all heard the sound of someone trying to push open the locked door. I got up and opened the door to see who it was. By the time I opened the door, there was no one on the stoop, but there was this woman walking down the sidewalk. I began to call out, but stopped mid-first word, deciding not to even bother. Maybe she had the wrong house, and that's what I said to my family when I sat down. Wrong house. My family all left around 9 that night. After that, the wife and I began our cleanup. I was mid-washing dishes when the front door opened and then shut pretty aggressively. In my head, it could have been my wife or any of my sisters returning because they forgot something. When I called for my wife and she answered from a different room, I knew it wasn't her. So I turned off the sink, dried my hands, and walked into the living room. There was a woman sitting in my big recliner chair in the corner. She was looking at the wall, muttering something to herself. I recognized her to be one of the women from next door. My wife entered the room and gasped. I calmly told the woman she was on the wrong side of the house. Then she looked at me and continued muttering inaudible words. There was clearly some form of dementia. I told my wife to go hurry and knock on the neighbor's door. My wife left and was back with Frances surprisingly quickly. Frances seemed very relieved and grabbed the woman by the arm and pulled her off the chair and out of the house to their side. Frances came back a minute later to apologize and explain that her sister has what's known as sundowning syndrome, a form of dementia in which the symptoms get worse as the day goes on. I asked a question I felt rather important, which was, does she get aggressive at all in this state? I didn't like her answer. She said it's just best to leave her alone later in the day when she starts acting up. I wasn't overly friendly considering I was pretty taken aback by what just happened, but I wasn't rude either. Frances left, and my wife and I just looked at each other with these what the hell just happened looks on our faces. Anyway, this time I remembered to lock the door. The next day we went to my wife's parents' house for Christmas dinner. It was a nice time. We got home late since they live about an hour away, so I'd say we got home around 11. We cuddled up in bed and watched whatever Christmas movie was still on at that point. After that, our Christmas was over, and we cut the TV and went to sleep. My eyes opened to a dark room. I sensed I had been woken up by a noise. I looked around the room and spotted her walking out of the room and into the hall. "Honey, are you okay?" "Huh?" I heard next to me in a groggy, half-asleep voice. My wife was still laying next to me in the bed. I leaped out of bed, looked down the hall, and saw the tall, lanky figure of who I could only assume to be that woman from next door. She noticed me in the doorway. I yelled "wrong house" before slamming the bedroom door shut and locking it. I heard her march down the hall back to our door and try opening it. She tried pushing and shoving the door, making these weird, angry noises. I called the police and said our new neighbor with dementia had broken in and might possibly be violent. I requested they ring the neighboring door to wake up Frances and get her to come in here. Waiting for the police was a miserable, nail-biting experience. When they finally did come, I left our room and went to the front door to let them in. Frances came in with the police, extremely worried and apologetic. Her sister was walking around in our basement, all confused-like. Frances took her back to the other side once again, then came back out to talk with the police and I. She expressed sincere sorrow and gratitude for me not hurting her. I told her firmly this was not okay, and warned if this happened again that I would consider pressing charges. From that point on, we obviously locked everything, including windows. Frances' sister eventually went to go live with their mother instead. Thank God for us. As a father of two, Christmas is already a stressful time of year for me. 2 Christmases ago, my kids were still in love with the idea of Santa Claus. After watching the Polar Express as a family, my wife tucked the kids into bed and she started putting the presents under the tree. I didn't really do any of that stuff. I just laid in bed watching something on TV, waiting for her to come up. By the time she was done, we were ready for bed. We're early birds when it comes to sleep. I'm also a pretty good sleeper. I'm lucky enough to be able to knock out within a few minutes. And waking up in the middle of the night is unusual for me, which is why I was confused at first when I woke up that night. Then I realized why. My daughter Kelsey was in the room, saying "Daddy" over and over. I rubbed my eyes and asked her what's wrong. She had this cute little happy smile on her face as she said, "Santa's here." I smiled back at her, saying, "Yes, he is." I told her she better be quiet and hurry back to her room so that Santa doesn't find out she's awake. She giggled and said okay, and walked out of my room, leaving the door open. I laid back down and tried to get back to sleep. A couple minutes later, I heard some shuffling around downstairs. I sighed because I knew Kelsey probably went down there to open her presents early, which is what she did the year before. I reluctantly got up and walked towards the stairs. As I started clomping down the stairs, the noises I was hearing ceased. I got to the bottom step and I was in the living room by the tree. The lights on the tree were still on, I guess because it was Christmas Eve night. All the presents seemed to still be there, so Kelsey wasn't going through them after all. Still, I walked around the living room and dining room whispering her name just to see if she was hiding somewhere. I gave up and went back up the stairs. I was about to go to my wife and I's room when I decided I'd step into Kelsey's room just to check if she was in there. And she was. She was sitting up in her bed, wide awake. I asked her why she went downstairs when I told her to go to bed. She whispered excitedly, "It wasn't me. Santa's down there." I tried to begin a sentence, but stuttered, then froze. I ran down the stairs and turned on the lights, looking around the whole house. Then I found that the back door was open. Nobody locked it. Someone had broken into our house on Christmas Eve night, right under our noses, and stole a few of the presents left under the tree, according to my wife. The worst part about this is I heard whoever was down there. In fact, my 7-year-old daughter did too. Hell, she even came into my room and basically gave me a warning. It still kills me to this day. It was January of 2016. My buddies and I live right next to a nature preserve and used to love to explore it. It was a weekend and we were looking for something to do, and being mischievous, we decided to go explore the storm drain that supplied water to the creek in the nature preserve. It had a barred barricade blocking entry into it, so we decided we'd throw some rocks in to see if the rocks made contact at any point so we could figure out the depth. However, we received something much more in return. After throwing a rock against the wall in the storm drain, a couple seconds passed, and we heard a terrifying thump or bang in return.
What the hell?
Dusk was approaching, so we called it a day and watched back over the video we recorded of it. The next weekend, I gathered a few more buddies, and we decided we would unbolt the barricade to the drain and go inside. I got the barricade to fall down, and we made our entrance. It went in about 20 feet until it hit a dead end. However, there was a second branch of the drain to our left that we'd have to take a step up to get into. We proceeded in one by one, all 5 of us. At first, it was nothing but spider webs and mud. We traveled about 500 to 1,000 feet into the drain as it kept getting skinnier, and we had to duck to proceed. We were all frozen in our tracks as we heard the same exact thump we heard the weekend before. A scary and hard to describe sound. We had no signal and were beyond terrified at that point because we were all right next to each other and the noise had come from much further away. At this point, my friend decided to start recording in case anything else happened. We made it out of the drain safely without anything else happening. The scariest and most chilling part of this whole story was when I reviewed the video and saw a slight outline of a head at one of the turns of the drain. This couldn't possibly have been one of us because we had all been together. I took a screenshot of it and zoomed in as far as I could, and well, I was horrified. There in the frame was a demon-shaped looking head with glowing eyes and what appeared to be pointy ears. To this day, we have never gone back into that nature preserve, let alone the storm drain. It all started when a group of friends and I decided to start exploring abandoned warehouses due to the stories and myths surrounding them in our hometown, Laredo, Texas. The story surrounding the area of warehouses was that the buildings were haunted due to immigrant workers being worked and mistreated to death. The local news covered the death of many of the workers. Many of the deaths were also ignored by the authorities due to the illegal status of the workers. In the warehouse that we visited, the company was in charge of the maintenance of the railroad tracks as well as the disposing of hazardous material. In the video I recorded, the barrels filled with chemical wastes are seen spilled open. The warehouses are located in a part of town where there's nothing really around except for train tracks. The predominantly Hispanic culture of my city gave rise to the stories about railroad workers that had lost their lives in the area. We decided to explore the warehouse during the day and then during the night. On our daytime exploration, we found remains of what seemed to be remnants of satanic rituals because we found a chicken's foot and pentagrams drawn in permanent marker. We figured that was the work of local groups trying to communicate with the damned souls of the workers. We also spotted a makeshift couch or bed where the workers would sleep. The night we visited, we had the feeling we were being watched. We were actually also being followed and attacked by crows inside the building.
Oh, man. ¿Qué son?
While we were exploring that night, on several occasions, we spotted shadows and heard noises throughout the area. As we delved deeper, we got the feeling that someone or something didn't want us in the warehouse. A creepy laugh can be heard in the video footage I captured, and that was our cue to get the hell out.
Nada. I don't think there's no power. Oh my god. Did you hear that? Yeah. Let's just get out of here.
Things only got weirder though, as the satanic drawings and the chicken foot were gone the next time we passed that spot, yet they were spotted only earlier that day. I'm completely convinced that someone or something was stalking us in that warehouse that night. I believe the lost souls of the workers, or a satanic group of people that frequented the place, were there that night with us, watching. As we walked out of the warehouse, we noticed that the crows were very on edge and tried to attack us, like I mentioned earlier. The events that happened that night still sometimes keep me up at night. I'm a freshman at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Some friends of mine came home from a hockey party after their game and asked me to come hang at their dorm. They brought some girls to the party that they knew from high school and happened to be in the city. They came back to the dorm to hang as well. One of the girls that came in was super friendly but very drunk. I didn't see her drink anything in the dorms. I left with my girlfriend at about 2 a.m. At around 3, I heard sirens and could see lights outside of my window. I figured it was just another kid that came home with alcohol poisoning. Then I heard the most gut-wrenching scream of my life. I walked out of my room and saw my friends from the dorm I had just left running down the hall wanting my help. I started running down the hall following them and saw blood on the floor and thought for sure someone had been stabbed. Then I saw 3 police officers and a paramedic team strapping the friendly girl down to a stretcher while she was screaming and thrashing. I went to ask my friends what happened and they looked exhausted. They said her eyes rolled back into her head. She started growling and bleeding heavily from both nostrils. She attacked some of our friends, yanking their hair and biting them like an animal. This girl fought off 3 6-foot-tall, fairly muscular guys by herself. Keep in mind, this girl is probably 5'1", 110 pounds, and was possessing superhuman strength, all while screaming at the top of her lungs. The scariest part is when the RA came over to pray over the situation, as he's a devoted Christian, and she started screaming, "F God, F Jesus, the devil is coming for you all." At this point, my heart was sinking in pure fear of the situation, as was everyone else who was present. The emergency responders said they had never seen anything like this, even if she was possibly drugged at the party. I was able to capture a roughly 20-second video of her screaming in the dorms. You can't really see her as the paramedics are in the way, but if you listen closely towards the end of the video, you can hear her scream, "They're coming for you all, they're coming for you next." Last I heard, she woke up with no memory of the situation, but is in a very dark place at the moment. This is the video that was captured. In my small town, there's not much to do, so my friends and I make the best of it, and in the winter we sometimes throw snowballs at cars. This was after we got done ice fishing one day. We went to my house and decided it would be fun to throw snowballs at cars for a while. Usually no one would get too angry as they were just snowballs, but one person got really mad at us. My friend Drake decided to throw a snowball at one more car and he told me to record. He hit right under the back passenger side. It sounded like a hard hit. We stayed there for a second, laughing, until he slowed down and eventually threw it in reverse.
Yeah. Sit there. He's right there.
We ran and hid behind a car in a different parking lot, and he pulled in about 5 feet from us, but he didn't see us. So we ran home, and that's when I stopped recording. When we got home, we took off our jackets and sat down to watch the video I just took, but we were interrupted by this sound. I froze in my seat. Then again. I didn't think this guy would find us, but still I turned off the lights. My dogs went crazy. Drake and I are 14, we don't get scared that easily, but this was freaking us out. We hid in my bathroom in my room and turned off the light. We actually laughed, thinking he would leave in a couple minutes. Our friends thought we were joking, so we took videos of him still pounding on the door. Our friends thought it was funny and karma, but we didn't find it amusing anymore. We thought we were in danger because he wouldn't leave. So I called my mom, who was at the Walmart about 10 minutes away. She sounded more like she was angry at us for throwing snowballs at cars than concerned that someone was banging on the door. She said she would call one of the neighbors to come scare him off, then she hung up. It felt like an eternity before he stopped banging on the front door, but only a couple minutes passed, and then the banging sounds came from a different door. Then it hit me that I didn't lock that door, and he could easily come in. Then I got a disturbing call from my mom, telling me one of the neighbors said she could see a deranged-looking man, possibly drugged out, looking through my room's window and the front door window. We sat there for as long as we could, and decided to make a plan to get the .410 shotgun in my mom's room, load it, and then make a break for it. But when we entered my mom's room to look for the gun, we saw his face at the window. His hairy, withered-looking face, and we screamed and ran. Drake had the idea to blast a police siren sound on my speaker in my room, so we ran to set the speaker up. While doing so, we heard the back door open, the one which was left unlocked. Drake managed to get the siren sound effect to play on my speaker, and that apparently worked, as we heard him leave through the same door he entered. Moments later, one of the neighbors, Paul, rang the doorbell. I let him inside and he stayed with us and waited for the cops and my mom to get there. We explained everything. The cops and my mom all said we shouldn't have been throwing snowballs at cars like that, obviously, and that we got lucky that they showed up when they did. My advice is to never mess with people like we did. You never know who you're dealing with.
I was working the night shift at my local Waldbaum's back when it used to be open 24 hours a day. There would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Waldbaum's, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was working stock in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over on the other side of the shelf in the next aisle over. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kinda caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird. Yet. Not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird. Not exactly ugly, just unusual. Like his upper lip kind of came out too far. Almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the U-boat cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave. But I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something. Something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again. I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the side of some highway in the country. From the hours of 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., the road was pretty dead. I would have maybe 1 or 2 people come in to pick cash in a whole night. It was a very boring and depressing job, especially doing the graveyard shift, but I had just finished college and I needed to pay off my loans. The only reason I kept this job was because my boss threw me an extra $5 an hour for doing the night shift. On this one cold December night, I was doing my usual thing, reading the newspaper, playing games on my phone, and whatnot, when I noticed the headlights of a car pulling off the highway into the parking lot. It was a red pickup truck. Somebody stepped out and shut the door. I went back to reading the paper as I saw that he was standing by the gas pump. I assumed he wasn't paying cash. I looked up a few moments later and saw that he was still standing in the same position, staring at the gas pump. I almost felt obligated to go out and help him. He was obviously confused. I felt a cold chill run up my spine as I saw the 6-foot-something tall man slowly turn his head to face me. I couldn't make out any features of his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I tried to pretend I didn't notice by going back to reading the paper. Of course, I wasn't really reading now. I was a bit shaken by the guy out there. I just wanted him to pay debit or credit and leave. I looked up and gasped as the man was now much closer to the front door of the building. It wouldn't have been so disturbing if it weren't for the fact that he wasn't moving. He was just standing still, as before, still looking in my direction. I walked over to the door to get a closer look. All I could see in his face was still blackness. I locked the door and flipped the open sign to closed on the door. I didn't care if this would possibly get me in trouble. I was not taking a chance because, quite frankly, I was scared shitless. I walked back behind the counter and sat down on one of the containers on the floor just so I couldn't see the man outside anymore. I stayed in that position for a good 5 minutes, texting every friend I have to see who was awake. I was desperate to tell somebody about this. When I finally got up to check that he was gone, I let out a full scream as the man was now right outside the door. I picked up the phone on the counter and called the police. The operator was reluctant to send somebody over because of the way I described the situation, but I persuaded them. I hid behind the counter, balled up like a child. I began to hear heavy thumps at the door, not innocent knocks to catch my attention. I mean thuds and thumps, trying to break down the door. And then eventually it finally stopped. I heard the sound of a car starting outside and then driving off. I looked outside and he was gone. A patrol cop along with a state trooper pulled into the parking lot. I reported the red pickup truck and told them which direction I thought he went in. I couldn't describe his face as all I saw was blackness. Of course, there wasn't much the police could do as the man didn't really do anything. I left that job a few months later to a job in the city. It was 2 years ago. I was called in to do the night shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven, since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, there was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items, with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then, out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the man, but at the same time, I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think, other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep. But my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. I struggled to slam the phone to the receiver. All night I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut. And I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about the incident, until one day, when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls. 7-Eleven had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet. What started out as seemingly just an innocent person turning into something of a prank ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that, for whatever reason, he changed his mind and left, because I haven't seen or heard from him since. All I can say is that man is dangerously ill. I've worked in the K-9 unit for 9 years, and I've worked my fair share of graveyard shifts. I've definitely come across weird things at night, but I'll never forget this one night. I worked with my dog Sammy, a German Shepherd. She was 2 years old at the time and was still kind of new to the job, just like me. I was driving down a road surrounded by crops when I spotted a suspicious-looking white van parked inside the crops. Both doors were open. I flashed my lights to try and draw out whoever was there. Nobody came out, so I parked and scanned the place out quickly. Nobody was in sight, so I took Sammy with me to track down the driver of the van. Sammy started going crazy when we reached the trunk of the van. She was pulling so hard she almost broke off the leash. I opened the trunk to the van, and a blast of foul air hit me in the face. I almost passed out from the mix of the horrible smell and the pure shock of what I saw in the trunk. I counted 7 full body bags, each with a pair of feet sticking out at the bottom. I requested immediate backup with my radio. I heard the sound of a twig snapping nearby, and Sammy just lost it. I lost grip of the leash, and she took off into the crops. I pulled out my gun and followed the sounds of her barking. As each and every crop hit me in the face, I felt as if something would reach out and grab me. I stopped when I could no longer hear Sammy's barking. But as I stopped, the sounds of movement did not. I realized I heard movement in all directions. I had never experienced such fear in my life. I stood still as the movement around me stopped. And then, out of nowhere, I felt 2 arms wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fight. I was going to die. And then, I heard the sound of Sammy's bark. followed by the scream of the man choking me as Sammy bit down on his leg. The next thing I did is something that I still question if it was appropriate doing to this day. I turned around and pulled the trigger, killing the man. I grabbed Sammy by the leash and ran all the way back to the car. I could tell people were following us from behind. I managed to make it to the car safely and drive a quarter-mile down the road. I didn't stop to see which way they went. I didn't hold my ground. I fled like a coward. I cared much more about our lives than I did this job, and I'll still say that today. But it still pains me knowing how much of a coward I was. Backup arrived shortly, but the van was gone. I even failed to get the plate number on dashcam video, or even just writing it down. This was within my first few months on the force, but it made me feel like absolute shit for months to come. I, someone who was sworn to protect, let a van full of killers get away.
I was 21 when this happened. It was 2017, and at the time, I was working part-time at a gas station a few towns over from where I lived. It was one of those jobs I only planned to keep for a few months, just until I figured out what I wanted to do next. The shifts were usually easy, a lot of ringing up snacks and cigarettes and stuff like that, more so than the occasional person paying for gas and cash. During the day, it was annoying but normal. The nights were different. The nights dragged. The place felt too bright inside and too dark outside, and every customer felt a little stranger. That night, I was working the closing shift by myself, and I still think about it all the time. The store closed at midnight. Around 9 or 10 at night, the phone started ringing. I answered without thinking anything of it. The second I picked up, I heard this weird voice. It was low and drawn out, like someone trying to sound like a killer in a horror movie. It reminded me right away of Ghostface from Scream. It sounded really forced, like someone trying to do an impression, but yet it was still unsettling. The voice asked if I was all alone in the store. I just stayed quiet for a second, then said something sarcastic like, "Yeah, you got me," and then I hung up. I figured it was one of my friends messing with me. I texted the group chat and asked which one of them was calling the store pretending to be a serial killer. They all found it funny and acted confused at first. One of them asked what I was talking about, then another said he was at home. I assumed they were just lying because that would have been the obvious response if they wanted to keep the prank going. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was that same fake horror movie voice. This time they asked why I hung up. I once again sarcastically said, "Alright, you got me." The voice let out this soft laugh that sounded weirdly real, not playful like I expected. Then it said I shouldn't be rude to people who know where I am. I hung up again, but this time I felt a little off. It was probably still a joke, but there was something about how calm the person sounded that got me. I kept trying to shake it off. Customers were still coming in at that point, enough to keep me distracted. People getting gas, buying beer, and getting lottery tickets. But every time it slowed down, I found myself looking at the phone. It rang a third time around 10:40. I answered, and I immediately regretted it. The voice asked if the store always got this quiet that late. That got under my skin more than I want to admit. I said nothing and hung up. After that, I texted my friends again, this time more seriously. I said it was getting old and asked who was doing it. Again, they all denied it. I started messaging them one by one. It was the same thing. One was with his girlfriend, one sent me a picture from his basement, one was apparently at a friend's house almost half an hour away. At that point, I started getting annoyed instead of scared. I thought maybe they had someone else doing it, but the truth was, even though the caller never said my name, he was saying things that matched what was happening in the store, like how quiet it was. Around 11, the calls started coming closer together. I stopped answering after the 5th one. The phone would ring and I would stare at it and let it stop on its own. Then a minute or two later, it would ring again. That went on for maybe 15 minutes. I started checking the cameras more. There were a few around the outside of the building and a few inside. The store sat by itself off a road that got pretty dead at night. There was a small patch of woods behind one side of the building and an alley-like area where the dumpster was. The outside cameras weren't great. They had blind spots, and the picture at night was grainy. Still, I kept flipping through them, half expecting to catch one of my idiot friends crouched outside laughing. I didn't see anyone, though. Then I started hearing little sounds outside, which at first I told myself was nothing. For example, a tap somewhere. Then what sounded like a light scrape near the side wall. Then a noise by the back that sounded like someone stepping on loose gravel. It got to a point where I couldn't dismiss it any longer. I texted the group chat again and told them to seriously stop. I even sent a picture of the empty store and wrote that this wasn't funny anymore. They kept denying it. One of my friends actually called me from his normal number and I told him what was happening. He sounded genuinely confused and said he wasn't joking, nor was he involved in any joke. He told me to lock the door early if I had to. I didn't want to do that unless I really felt I needed to. Part of me still thought I was making too much of it. At around 11:40, one last customer came in. I remember the exact sound of the door opening because it made me jump. I looked up and saw just a regular-looking guy at first, maybe late 20s or 30s. Nothing outwardly crazy about him. He wasn't dirty or dressed weird. He just had this blank expression. He didn't say hello, he just walked in and started moving through the aisles. I watched him on the cameras while pretending not to. He took way too long for someone who ended up buying one bag of chips. He kept drifting to different aisles and then stopping. More than once, I saw the top half of his face appear above the shelves while he looked toward the counter. Not in a casual way either. It felt like he was checking on me. I kept thinking maybe he was high, or maybe he was tired, or maybe he was deciding what he wanted. But my stomach had that heavy feeling by then, like my body already knew something was wrong before my brain wanted to admit it. He was in there for at least 8 or 9 minutes. Then he finally came up to the counter with a bag of chips. He still didn't say a word, so I didn't either. I just took the chips and scanned them. When I looked down at the register, everything felt normal for 1 second. Then I looked up and caught him staring directly into my eyes. He held it for maybe 2 seconds. It doesn't sound long, but it was. There was no expression on his face when he did it. Then he looked down and paid. I handed him back the bag, and he turned and walked toward the door. I remember thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a weird guy. But right as he got to the door and pushed it halfway open, he stopped and turned his head back toward me without fully turning his body. His chin was slightly lowered, so his eyes had to look up at me. Then he smiled. I still don't know how to explain that smile without sounding dramatic. It looked like he knew exactly how creepy he looked, and he was doing it on purpose. It made every hair on my body stand up. Then he stepped outside, and instead of walking toward any of the pumps or toward a car, he walked around the side of the building. When he did it, he kept his eyes on me through the glass. He kept that smile, too. I just stood there watching him until the angle cut him off. Then I rushed to the camera monitor and followed him there. I saw him round the building and head toward the side where the woods were. Then he disappeared into the blind spot behind the building. He didn't come back out. I waited maybe 10 seconds, then 20, then a minute. He never reappeared. That was enough for me to lock the door early, even though it was a little before midnight. This part might sound dramatic, but I texted my family and my friends and told them that there was a creepy guy outside and I wasn't joking anymore. I said if I stopped replying, that meant something probably happened to me because of him. I rushed through the closing stuff as fast as I could. I barely cleaned anything. I kept checking the cameras over and over, expecting to see him pop back out. Nothing. Midnight hit, and I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my stuff, turned off what I needed to turn off, and went to the front door. I unlocked it and stepped out, and that moment of having to relock it was so tense I couldn't have done it quick enough. Once I did, I took off running to my car. It was parked off to the side of the building. I got most of the way there, and just as I reached it and slowed for half a second, I heard fast footsteps. Not running, but worse somehow, like speed-walking steps slapping the pavement in front of the store. I turned and saw him. It was that guy. He had come from the front corner of the building and was moving toward me and my car fast. I yanked my car door open and threw myself inside. I locked the door and started the engine so fast I almost flooded it. The second the car started, I hit reverse and peeled out of that lot. I looked once in the mirror and saw him standing there in the lights watching me leave. The whole drive home, I was sending voice texts and regular texts to everyone saying I was right, that I knew he was going to come out of nowhere. None of that was a prank anymore. The next day, I texted my boss and told him exactly what happened. I said I wasn't doing overnights anymore. He looked at the footage later, and his response honestly made me even angrier. He got kind of defensive and said the guy looked like a regular customer to him. He said maybe I had just gotten spooked because of the phone calls and connected things that weren't connected. That pissed me off more than I can explain. I was the one there. I was the one getting the calls. I was the one who saw that guy disappear around the building and come speed walking at me out of nowhere when I left. I didn't care if the footage didn't fully capture how it felt because I knew what happened. I quit right after that. I didn't even argue much. I just told him if he thought that was normal, he could work the closing shift himself. I ended that job with attitude, and I was proud of it. Even now, many years later, I still think the caller and that guy who came in were the same person, even if I can't prove it. My name is Cadence. I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of my town. The place is right off the highway, but the parking lot also has a back entrance that's available to the general town. It's nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox has been playing the same rotation of classic rock for years. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist looking for a stiff drink. I like it though. The routine is predictable, the tips are surprisingly decent, and I've learned how to handle the usual bar crowd. The talkers, the flirters, the quiet drinkers, and the ones who just want to be left alone. Weekends are obviously a lot more hectic, but the thing about working during the week is that I'm expected to work my night shifts alone. I don't even get a bar back to pop in now and again. Yeah, it's obviously easier work and slower during the week, but I miss the company of my coworkers. I tend to be pretty vigilant during my shifts because we do get the occasional bar fight considering the kinds of crowds we attract. That's why I clocked the guy immediately. It was sometime after 1 in the morning on a Tuesday when he walked in. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his late 40s, but he was extremely clean cut and well groomed. Not the kind of look you'd expect from a guy his age in an area like this. He was wearing a black turtleneck underneath a black trench coat. Definitely well dressed, but casual about it. I'm not sure how to explain it, but he had this aura of sophistication about him that makes you think of money. Real money, not the loud look at me kind. He glanced around slowly before walking swiftly over to the bar and taking a seat. I also remember him having oddly good posture, but that's neither here nor there. When I walked over, he glanced at the bottles behind me and ordered something top shelf without hesitation. As I was pouring his drink, he asked me if I liked working here with a smile on his face. It was a normal enough question, so I answered him honestly. I told him yeah and smiled back. I then made a joke about being a bartender or something. I wish I could say I got a creepy vibe from him, but that's not the energy he was giving off. He genuinely seemed like a stand-up guy, kind of like the single dad at his kid's baseball game that gives the whole team a high five. He chatted with me for a bit, which I didn't mind since the bar was pretty quiet at that point. Eventually, he asked me if I ever thought about doing something bigger, which I admit was somewhat bizarre. Again though, not a totally creepy question given the nature of the situation. I gave him my standard bartender smile and told him I was happy for now. He nodded and sipped his drink, seemingly disappointed at my answer for reasons I didn't understand. After a long pause, he asked me what time I got off out of nowhere. That question surprised me. I hadn't picked up any kind of flirting from him whatsoever, so I was a little disappointed to discover that our conversation had just been another one of those empty attempts at getting my number. I smiled and gave him a vague answer, trying to brush him off in a friendly way without seeming uptight. Before he could answer, I busied myself and began wiping down the counter, but he didn't press. He just smiled like he already knew. then drained his drink and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, laying it gently on the bar like it was nothing. Then, without another word, he walked out into the night. I didn't really know what to make of the encounter. I know it sounds like nothing, but his demeanor was just so far off my radar that I was intrigued. Either way, I figured I was never going to see him again and got on with my life. As it would turn out though, I was wrong. About a week later, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. She drew my attention since I hadn't seen her before. She looked like she was in her mid-30s and was dressed in a way that didn't quite match her age. Trendy, but off, like someone trying a little too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. I watched her closely as the two of them approached the bar. Everything about her seemed calculated, from the way she smiled too easily to the way she leaned against the bar like we were already friends. As I was setting down napkins in front of them, the very first thing she said to me wasn't a hello or a drink order, but a compliment. She put on this overly joyful smile and said, "You're so pretty." Her fingers brushed against my arm as she said it, lingering just a second longer than normal. I laughed and thanked her, but I could instantly tell that something was off about this woman. The man didn't speak, which I thought was also a little strange given that he had been so talkative last time. They ordered drinks and poured them, and that's when questions came flooding in. The woman asked me how long I'd been working here, along with how old I was and a bunch of other small talk questions like that. I answered in short, polite sentences, but I got the sense that this wasn't small talk. She was studying me. At one point, she looked over at the man, and it seemed like they were communicating despite not speaking. She looked back at me and told me that she ran an exclusive event club. She leaned in a bit as she said it, lowering her voice as if to prevent her being overheard by another patron. She told me that she's always looking for young, fun people for private parties, and that I'd make a killing, 10 grand for a weekend. I let out a small, forced laugh and told her it sounded too good to be true. She insisted that it was real, and told me that a bunch of girls like me worked for them. Her smile never faltered at any moment, which was starting to creep me out. She steered the conversation back to the job, circling around the same words. Fun, safe, exclusive. Then, casually, she said, "You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better." My pulse kicked up. I wasn't playing around at that point. I didn't even bother pretending like I wasn't creeped out. "I'm good," I said in a firm voice. No smile on my face this time. Just then, a group of customers walked in, laughing and talking loudly. The woman's expression changed in an instant, her friendly mask slipping just slightly before she turned to the man beside her. Without another word, they left. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't unsettled after that. Those random people had just propositioned me for God knows what. I told my coworkers and my boss about the situation, and we all agreed to keep an eye out should those people return. My boss assured me that he was always a 15-minute drive away should I need him, and the bar's security cameras were typically enough to deter any misbehavior. There wasn't really much I could do beyond that. It's not like those people had done anything illegal. I tried to push it out of my head, but a few nights later, after closing, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the feeling of being watched crawled over my skin like static. As I walked to my car, I kept my head down, my keys clutched tight in my hand. When I pulled out of the lot, I checked my mirrors. The car followed. It stayed back just enough to avoid suspicion, but every turn I made, it was still there. I took a random turn onto a side street, and it followed. Another, still there. I started freaking out internally. I knew it was them. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Then, without hesitating, I navigated and pulled into the parking lot of a police station, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles practically turned white. The second I pulled in, the car sped off. Nothing happened after that for a while, but I knew it wasn't over. It turned out I was right. It was a slow weekday shift, barely anyone coming in. By midnight, I was wiping down the counter, half thinking about closing early, when the door creaked open. It was the woman. I immediately sent my boss a text as inconspicuously as I possibly could. I looked back up, and the woman was staring at me with that same artificial smile. She walked slowly to the bar and sat down with her hands folded neatly. I was debating just telling her to leave when she said, "Thought I'd come check on you." My stomach started twisting, but I did my best to hide it. I told her we were about to close and that she had to leave, but she made this pouty face and asked for just one old-fashioned. I thought about denying her, but I figured pouring the drink would stall her long enough for my boss to arrive. So I turned around and got started, trying to keep my cool. And then I heard it. The soft, unmistakable click of the front door shutting. I whipped around. The woman was gone. I felt this awful pit in my stomach as I stepped toward the entrance. Through the glass, I saw it. A black van idling just outside. Without thinking, I locked the door as quickly as I could. But then, metal rattling from the back door. Someone was trying to get in. I didn't think. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could, a metal shaker, and clutched it like a weapon as I dialed 911 with my other hand. There was no way the police would get there in time, so I thought about making a run for it out the front door, but I didn't for whatever reason. I was bracing myself for a fight when I saw headlights pulling into the lot. It was my boss. The sounds on the back door suddenly stopped, and a few seconds later, the van pulled out of the lot with a screech. I embraced my boss and told him what had happened, and he said he had gotten the license plate of the van as it was leaving. When the cops arrived, my boss reviewed the security footage with them. It was worse than I had imagined. Just before the woman left, the cameras had captured two masked figures crouching near the front door, waiting. There was another person in the back who was banging on the door with his fist, clearly trying to flush me out to the front. It was downright horrifying. To make matters worse, the plate number my boss had caught turned out to be unregistered. It's been quite a while since this incident, but no progress has been made. The only good news to come out of the whole thing is that my boss doesn't make me work alone anymore. Despite that, I'm still extremely uneasy anytime I'm scheduled for a night shift. I still question how they knew I'd be working alone. It doesn't make any sense. Even now, I often think about what would have happened had I given in to fear and run out the front door. I used to work the night shift at a gas station / convenience store off a quiet stretch of highway. I say used to because after what happened to me a few months ago, I won't work a night shift again. It's a small station, the kind that barely gets any business once it gets late. Most of my shift was spent restocking shelves, wiping down counters, and occasionally ringing up a trucker or traveler passing through. I remember the whole thing vividly. It was just past 2:30 in the morning. By then, even the truckers had mostly dried up, and I was left with basically nothing to do. I scrolled mindlessly on my phone, trying to kill some time. At one point, I stepped outside for some air, rubbing my hands together against the cold. I exhaled a few times, watching my breath disappear in the cold. The parking lot was empty, just the pumps, the road, and the dark stretch of trees beyond. The neon sign flickered faintly, and I remember it being hazy out, like you could literally see the moisture in the air. Even with the highway not too far off, it was pretty silent out there. Right as I was about to walk back towards the store, I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around and realized there was a person standing behind one of the pumps. How had I not noticed him earlier? He was wearing a dark red hoodie with the hood up, and he had both hands shoved in his pockets. There wasn't a car in sight, so he obviously wasn't fueling up. The only thing was, he didn't seem to be heading towards the store either. He was just standing there, half turned toward the store like he was watching me. At first, I figured maybe he was waiting for someone, but something about the way he moved rubbed me the wrong way. He was kind of shuffling about in this circular pattern. I entered the store, but made sure to keep an eye on him through the glass. I kept track of him while pretending not to, hoping someone would drive up and pick him up or something. But after a few minutes, he started walking toward the door. Slow at first, then suddenly pushing inside like he'd made up his mind all at once. He walked up to the counter, but didn't say anything right away, just stared at me like he was sizing me up. Then, in a rushed, almost rehearsed way, he muttered that his car had broken down just before the pumps. He said he needed a jump or maybe just a little gas to get to the next town. I was literally shocked. He wasn't even trying to make his story believable. Like, I couldn't believe he actually expected me to buy his BS story. I offered to call a tow truck instead. No, he said, too quick, shaking his head. He just needed a flashlight, maybe some help checking under the hood. Something was definitely off, that much was true. The way he spoke, the way he watched my reaction, it felt like a test. To be fair though, people walking into gas stations at that hour are usually a little strange, and I started wondering whether he actually needed help and was just an odd person or on something. I asked him where his car was parked, and he told me it was just beyond the highway entrance. I was obviously skeptical, but then he pointed at the monitor behind me. I turned to look at the screen, and to my surprise, there actually was a car parked out there. I thought to myself, oh crap, maybe this guy really does need help. And that's when it hit me. I had literally just been outside, and I would have remembered a car parked out there. I glanced back at the monitor, and saw the slightest movement near the car's back bumper. Someone was crouching just out of view. A cold wave of dread hit me. I forced a casual smile and agreed to help the guy, but not before telling him I needed to grab my phone from the back office. I turned slowly, not wanting to spook him, but the second I was out of his direct sight, I slammed my hand onto the emergency panic button under the counter. The alarm went off instantly, screeching through the store. I expected him to attack me, but what he did instead was even more unsettling. His nervous energy disappeared. No more fake urgency, no more shifting from foot to foot. He actually relaxed. His whole body language shifted, and then he smiled. Not a panicked smile, not an embarrassed one either. A slow, knowing grin, like he had all the time in the world, like this was amusing to him. I was in shock. I didn't even have time to get physical with him. In one fluid motion, he turned and bolted. I ran to the monitors just in time to see both of them take off. Not toward the car, but into the woods behind the station. The car just sat there, engine off, headlights off. No one inside. By the time the police arrived, it was exactly as I saw it. The car was still there, but the men were gone. No footprints leading away, no sign of them anywhere. And then one of the officers pointed something out. Something I hadn't noticed before. The front passenger door was open. There had been a third person inside the whole time. The police took my statement down, I turned over the surveillance footage, and that was that. A few days later, they followed up with me. They had the car towed and ran the plates. Turned out, it had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier, over 100 miles away. No one had come forward to claim it, no reports of missing persons, no other crimes linked to it, just an abandoned vehicle in the middle of nowhere with no explanation. That was months ago and still nothing. I don't know why convenience stores are such popular targets, but I can say for sure that I will never work another night shift again. This happened a couple weeks ago. I worked the night shift at Walmart. It's not the worst job in the world, but after a while, it starts to feel like you're just floating through time. The nights blend together. Same shelves, same routine, same dull hum of the overhead lights. Hopefully something better comes along. I usually hang out in and stock the electronics section, which is nice because it's quieter than the other areas. People don't exactly come rushing in at 2 a.m. to buy phone chargers and Bluetooth speakers. Most of the customers are either night owls killing time or truckers grabbing last-minute supplies before heading back on the road. That's why I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another guy wandering the aisles, probably waiting for someone. But after a few minutes, I realized he wasn't shopping. He wasn't even pretending to. He just kept appearing. Every time I glanced up, he was lingering nearby, hovering in the next aisle over or standing a little too still by the clearance section. He wasn't looking at anything. He was just standing there, watching me. I told myself I was overthinking it. The store is big and maybe he was just taking his time. But the way he moved, always just close enough for me to notice, never actually picking anything up, it set something deep in my gut on edge. I was waiting for him to just get on with it and ask for my number, but he never approached me. It was like he wanted me to see him, which didn't make any sense to me. I went to radio someone about it, but realized that the batteries in my radio must have been dead because it wasn't working. Eventually, I started debating whether I should go find a manager when I felt a hand wrap around my arm. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but before I could react, a woman's voice rang out loud, friendly, overly familiar. She exclaimed, "There you are," before going on a little spiel about how she had been looking all over for me. I turned, completely thrown off, and saw a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was smiling, her grip firm on my arm, like we were old friends reuniting. Before I could say anything, she leaned in and whispered, her tone dropping to something low and urgent. "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." My stomach dropped. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance back. The man was still there, only now he wasn't even pretending to browse. He was staring right at me. A cold wave of fear crept over me. I let her pull me. I didn't even question it. The way she grabbed my arm, the way she spoke so loud and casually, like we were two old friends reuniting, I clung to it. I was beyond grateful that someone had realized what was going on and put herself in an uncomfortable position just to help me. She kept up the act as we walked, rambling about something, maybe a trip she had taken, maybe an inside joke we supposedly shared. I barely processed the words. My thoughts were stuck on him. Had he really been recording me? That was creepy as hell. I wanted to know if he was still following us, but I couldn't muster the courage to turn around just yet. The woman steered me through the aisles, moving fast. I barely noticed where we were going, only that we were going, that the distance between me and that man was growing. In all honesty, I was kind of expecting her to quit the pretending to know me at some point, but she kept it up. At one point, it was getting a little uncomfortable, so I glanced behind me, and to my relief, that man was no longer following. The woman kept pulling me forward, though. I told her that we were good now and that we should probably go find my manager, but she just squeezed my arm tighter, telling me that he was lurking somewhere. I thought to myself, so what? What's he gonna do in a store full of employees? I was obviously worried at first because no one was around, but now that I wasn't alone, I started realizing that there wasn't much of a point in being scared anymore. I told her this, but she continued moving. I told her I was serious and planted my feet, twisting my arm slightly to loosen her grip. "You can let go now," I said, but she didn't. She smiled at me, but something in it was off. "Come on, just a little further," she said, basically tugging me at that point. I glanced around. The store was basically dead. We had moved past the registers, past the self-checkout, past the aisles that saw the most foot traffic. The warehouse section loomed ahead, dimly lit and nearly empty. Beyond that was the side exit, the one without cameras, the one employees used for loading shipments. That's when it dawned on me. She was leading me straight to the exit. I didn't think. I screamed for help as I yanked my arm free of her grasp with all my might. She lost her grip just enough for me to pull free. I didn't waste another second. I turned and ran toward the front of the store. As I fled, she yelled out something behind me. She yelled for me to come back, followed by my name, which I hadn't given her. I kept running until I saw one of my coworkers who was running toward me, most likely reacting to my screaming. I told him to call security, which he promptly did. That woman was long gone, though. By the time I told my story to the security guards, that woman and that man were nowhere in sight. They reviewed the security footage, and just as I suspected, the woman and man walked into the store together. She had been with him the entire time. The man's face was clear as day in one of the frames, but hers was always turned away. I had a feeling she was the mastermind behind the whole thing, so I was infuriated that the cameras hadn't picked her face up. Every second of it had been planned. The police got involved, and the whole thing went down as a failed abduction attempt. I'm still waiting for a resolution about it. That man should definitely be easy to track down, given his face was caught on camera. I have no idea how that woman knew my name. That's what terrifies me the most. Those people hadn't just picked me at random. I was a direct target.